The year was 1640, and the streets of Europe buzzed with unease. War loomed on the horizon. The old order of the church strained under the weight of new ideas, and whispers of heresy and hidden wisdom lingered like smoke in the taverns and universities. It was in this atmosphere of tension that a strange document appeared, printed anonymously in the German city of Kassel. It was not a royal decree, nor a theological treatise, nor even the rambling notes of a wandering scholar. It was something far more dangerous, a manifesto. Its title, Fama Fraternitatis, the fame of the brotherhood. Those who stumbled across its pages found themselves shaken. Here was a voice that claimed to speak not for a single man, not even for a nation, but for a mysterious order, an invisible brotherhood that had been working in silence for more than a century. The words declared that a secret fraternity of chosen men, enlightened by divine wisdom and ancient knowledge, had long been laboring in obscurity to heal the world. They promised a renewal of learning, the uniting of science, religion, and philosophy, and even cures for human suffering. It spoke of hidden truths buried in secret places, of wisdom carried from the East, of a vault where wonders beyond imagination had been sealed for future generations. To some, it was a message of hope in a world on the brink of collapse. To others, it was a provocation, an assault on authority, perhaps even a trick of the devil. The former was only 30-odd pages long, but within those pages, it planted a seed that would spread like wildfire. In an age when even a whisper could lead to the stake, this manifesto dared to declare that the rulers and priests of Europe had failed, and that a hidden order had been entrusted with a greater mission, to reform the entire world. Who were these Rosicrucians? That was a name given in the text, the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross. The symbol itself was both strange and familiar. A cross, the sign of suffering and redemption, entwined with a rose, the emblem of secrecy, purity, and unfolding beauty. No one had seen their faces. No one knew their meeting places, and yet the manifesto claimed they had been silently guiding Europe from the shadows. "We speak unto you by parables," the text declared, "but we will tell you no more than we have received from our master." A master? A founder? The mystery deepened. In the dim candlelight of scholar studies, the words were copied and passed from hand to hand. Young students read them in whispers at universities. Alchemists read them with pounding hearts, believing the text confirmed their hidden art. Theologians debated its heresies, while rulers and priests demanded to know who had dared to spread such dangerous words. Was this brotherhood real? Were they simply a hoax, a clever invention to inflame minds already restless with reformist dreams? Or had something truly ancient and powerful just revealed itself to Europe on the edge of transformation? The timing was no accident. The air of Europe was thick with expectation. The Protestant Reformation had torn apart the old world. Science was beginning to challenge long-accepted truths, and apocalyptic fears haunted every corner. Many believed the end of the age was near, that some great reckoning was coming. Into this fevered landscape came the Foma, claiming that an invisible order, bound together in secrecy, possessed the wisdom to guide humanity into a new dawn. Its authors wrote with authority, as if their very existence was proof of a destiny unfolding. What unsettled the authorities most was not simply the claims of hidden knowledge, but the vision of society where wisdom would no longer be hoarded by princes and popes but shared freely. The manifesto spoke of medicine that could heal all disease, of knowledge that could liberate minds, of enlightenment that could unite mankind. In a world where power was maintained by controlling what people knew and believed, such promises were dangerous. If the Rosicrucians existed, they threatened the foundations of power itself. But the strangest thing was this: no one could find them. There was no address to write to, no lodge to visit, no leader to denounce. The brotherhood seemed to exist everywhere and nowhere at once, a whisper in the dark, a shadow flickering across the mind of Europe. Scholars began writing treatises, pamphlets, and rebuttals, but the more they wrote, the more the legend grew. The Rosicrucians had spoken, and then they vanished into silence. Perhaps that was their greatest weapon, the power of suggestion, of mystery. For what is more dangerous to authority than an invisible hand, a rumor of power, a secret that refuses to be silenced? The Fama Fraternitatis had done its work. It had set minds aflame. From the alchemist's laboratory to the king's court, from the student's bench to the priest's pulpit, the question spread: who were the Rosicrucians? Were they angels of wisdom, devils in disguise, or the dream of a desperate age? The whisper in the dark had been heard. and Europe would never be the same again. The world into which the Rosicrucian manifestos appeared was one teetering on the edge of collapse. Early 17th century Europe was a continent haunted by unrest, its lands fractured by religion, its people scourged by hunger, and its rulers consumed by ambition. The glow of the Renaissance still lingered in the cities of Italy, and discoveries across the oceans had expanded the known world. Yet these achievements were shadowed by fear. To live in this time was to walk among contradictions, the promise of knowledge colliding with the certainty of violence, the dream of progress struggling against the weight of superstition. It was, above all, a Europe on fire. Religion had become the tinderbox of the age. The Protestant Reformation, ignited a century earlier, had torn Christendom into rival camps. Luther's words had broken the monopoly of Rome, but they had also unleashed a storm that refused to settle. German principalities fought among themselves. Sweden and Denmark eyed the Catholic South with suspicion, and Spain and Austria sought to crush dissent in the name of faith. Every kingdom feared betrayal, every priest suspected heresy, and every village lived under the shadow of inquisitors or reformers, depending on which flag flew overhead. This climate of division left ordinary people in despair. The promise of salvation was weaponized by both sides, while entire communities were uprooted by war and exile. In the midst of these religious wars, famine stalked the countryside. Crops failed, often from weather as strange as it was relentless. The Little Ice Age had gripped Europe. Winters grew longer, summers unpredictable, harvest meager. Starving peasants wandered the roads, and cities, choked with the poor, became breeding grounds of plague. The memory of the Black Death was not distant history. Even now, in the 17th century, outbreaks could sweep through towns and leave them silent within weeks. A cough in the marketplace could be the beginning of an apocalypse. For people who had seen half their family taken by disease, who had buried children in shallow graves, whispers of a hidden brotherhood with knowledge of medicine and healing carried a desperate allure. Could such men exist? And if they did, why had they hidden themselves until now? At the same time, the old certainties of the medieval world were dissolving. Astronomy challenged theology. Copernicus and Galileo declared that the earth was not the center of the universe, though the church burned books and men to resist such ideas. Printing presses, once a tool of the faithful, became engines of revolution. Ideas moved faster than armies now, spreading from scholar to student to tavern in days. The people of Europe were no longer content to accept the words of priests as unchallenged truth. They craved knowledge, but knowledge carried risk. For kings and princes, this was a dangerous moment. Their authority rested on the belief that power flowed from God, yet every whisper of reform, every new invention, and every strange pamphlet gnawed at that belief. To rule in this time was to face constant threats, uprisings, conspiracies, and plots from both within and without. The fear of secret societies was not a distant paranoia. It was a daily concern. Conspiracies had toppled monarchs before, and whispers of a hidden brotherhood promising world reformation sounded to rulers like a blade held to their throats. And then came the wars, the storm that would come to define the century, the 30 Years' War. Though not yet begun in 1614, the sparks were already smoldering. The Holy Roman Empire was fractured, Protestants and Catholics suspicious, and the balance of power fragile. Within a few years, Europe would descend into one of the bloodiest conflicts in its history, a war that left entire regions barren and millions dead. In hindsight, the Rosicrucian message appeared not as a curiosity but as prophecy, a promise of unity, of peace, of knowledge in a world about to destroy itself. In this furnace of fear and longing, the Forma Fraternitatis struck like lightning. Imagine the weary scholar, sitting by candlelight, his books damp with the breath of winter, finding within its pages a suggestion of a secret brotherhood devoted not to war but to healing. Imagine the student, restless and angry with the corruption of his rulers, reading about a fraternity that claimed to stand above kings and priests. Imagine the alchemist, toiling in solitude, convinced that at last he had found proof that others shared his secret pursuit of hidden wisdom. The manifesto was not just words. It was a mirror reflecting the deepest desires and anxieties of an age. The effect was explosive because Europe was ready to believe in salvation, ready to hope for reform, ready to dream of secret hands guiding the chaos. Whether the brotherhood existed or not mattered less than the fact that people needed it to exist. The Rosicrucians became, in that moment, a symbol of everything the age yearned for: order in the midst of chaos, light in the midst of darkness, and a future beyond the smoke of burning cities. But with hope came fear. Authorities asked, what if this so-called brotherhood was not of God but of the devil? What if its promises of medicine and wisdom were mere bait to lead souls astray? The Inquisition had long taught that hidden knowledge was dangerous knowledge, that only the Church could guard truth safely. A secret fraternity claiming to hold the keys to enlightenment could not be tolerated. The Rosicrucians might be saviors, or they might be heretics in disguise, threatening to tear apart the last fragile strands holding Europe together. Thus, the arrival of the Rosicrucian text was not a quiet event in a quiet age. It was a whisper heard in a world already aflame, a spark falling onto dry wood. The former did not introduce mystery into Europe. It revealed the mystery that was already there, lingering in the minds of scholars, peasants, kings, and priests alike. And as the fires of war and plague raged, the question grew louder. Was this hidden brotherhood truly watching, waiting to reveal itself when the world needed it most? Or had a clever pen simply played upon the desperate longings of a Europe on fire? Among the many strange details in the Rosicrucian manifestos, none stirred as much fascination, or as much confusion, as their emblem, the rose entwined with the cross. It was more than a symbol, it was a riddle. In a Europe obsessed with signs, where every emblem carried layers of meaning, the rose and cross together provoked endless speculation. Was it Christian, pagan, alchemical? Did it point backward to forgotten traditions, or forward to something entirely new? The cross, of course, was instantly recognizable. For centuries it had been the supreme symbol of Christ's sacrifice, the mark of redemption and suffering. It adorned altars, crowns, and battle flags. Kings waged holy wars beneath its arms, while heretics were executed in its shadow. Yet in the Rosicrucian context, the cross was stripped of its usual weight of authority and punishment. It was paired with something softer, stranger, and far more elusive, the rose. The rose, unlike the cross, carried no single meaning. It was a flower of love in the poetry of troubadours, the emblem of secrecy in ancient Rome. Sub rosa, under the rose, meant something spoken in confidence. In Christian mysticism, the rose often represented the Virgin Mary, purity, and divine wisdom blooming within the soul. In alchemy, it symbolized unfolding perfection, the hidden flower of transformation that could only bloom through fire and patience. To join the rose with the cross were to fuse opposites, beauty and suffering, secrecy and revelation, love and sacrifice. For those who encountered the emblem in the early 17th century, it was a puzzle that invited obsession. Scholars debated whether the rose stood for hidden natural philosophy, while the cross represented divine truth. Alchemists saw it as a formula, the marriage of matter and spirit, the union of opposites, the great work itself. Others whispered darker interpretations, claiming it was a parody of Christianity, a satanic inversion meant to deceive the gullible. The secrecy of the symbol was as important as its meaning. By never fully explaining it, the manifestos ensured that the emblem worked like a mirror. Every reader saw in the rose and cross what they most desired, or feared. For the devout, it was a sign of Christian renewal. For the alchemist, proof that others shared his quest for hidden transmutations. For the revolutionary, a promise of change beyond the reach of kings. This ambiguity was no accident. Symbols had power not because they gave answers, but because they provoked questions. The rose and cross compelled people to interpret, to seek, to wonder. And in the very act of searching, they were drawn deeper into the mystery the Rosicrucians wove. Yet the emblem also carried echoes of older traditions, threads that linked it to the deep roots of Western esotericism. Some claimed it was descended from ancient Egyptian mysteries, where the lotus flower was paired with the ankh, the cross with a loop, the sign of life. Others traced it to the Persian rose gardens, where poets wrote of flowers that concealed divine secrets. Still others pointed to the Crusades, when knights returned from the East bearing strange symbols and stories of hidden wisdom. Could the Rosicrucian emblem be the heir to these forgotten legacies, a sign that the Brotherhood held knowledge stretching back beyond Christendom itself? The fascination was not limited to scholars. Ordinary people, weary of war and hungry for hope, saw in the rose and cross a vision of harmony, beauty surviving in suffering, light blooming even on the wood of death. The emblem became a whisper of possibility, that the chaos of the world was not meaningless, that beneath pain and loss some secret wisdom was quietly flowering. But symbols are dangerous, and this one was no exception. To the guardians of orthodoxy, The rose and cross seemed an authorized invention, a blending of sacred and profane. If the cross was a sign of Christ, how dare anyone pair it with a pagan flower, a symbol of secrecy and hidden power? To them, the emblem was not harmony but blasphemy, a sign that the Rosicrucians cloaked heresy in beauty. And yet the more authorities condemned it, the more fascination it inspired. Pamphlets circulated across Europe, each attempting to decode the emblem, each offering different explanations. The result was not clarity but an ever-growing storm of speculation. The rose and cross refused to yield their secret, and so the legend only deepened. Perhaps that was the point. The Rosicrucians understood that mystery is more powerful than certainty. A plain truth can be dismissed, a riddle demands pursuit. By giving the world a symbol both familiar and strange, they ensured that their presence lingered everywhere, even if no lodge, no meeting hall, no physical brotherhood could be found. Wherever a rose bloomed beside a cross, on a page, in a mind, the order lived again. As the years passed, the emblem would echo throughout architecture and ritual. It would appear in alchemical diagrams, in the secret chambers of Freemasons, even in the mystic movements of the modern era. But in the beginning, in that restless Europe of the 1600s, it was simply a question written in symbols. What blooms at the intersection of beauty and sacrifice? What hidden wisdom lies between the rose and the cross? And so, the emblem became a signpost, pointing toward a mystery that promised not only hidden knowledge but transformation itself. To seek the Rosicrucians was to seek the secret blooming within the world's suffering, the hidden flower of truth entwined with the wood of history. But to approach the symbol too closely was to risk danger, for the rose had thorns, and the cross carried weight. The hidden rose and cross was not simply an emblem, it was an invitation, and those who accepted it stepped onto a path from which there was no return. At the heart of the Rosicrucian mystery lies a single figure, a man who never left behind a portrait, a document, or a verifiable trace of his life. And yet his name was whispered across Europe with awe, fear, and longing. Christian Rosicrucian, the supposed founder of the Rosicrucian Brotherhood. His life story, told in fragments within the Forma Fraternitatis, reads less like a biography and more like a legend, a parable dressed in the clothes of history. But who was he? Was he anyone at all? According to the manifesto, Rosicrucian was born in 1378, a German noble of little wealth but great curiosity. Orphaned at a young age, he was sent to a monastery where he received the education of a scholar. But unlike other monks content to copy scripture and obey authority, Rosicrucian hungered for something more. The text describes how, in his youth, he set out on a long pilgrimage, not to Rome, not to Jerusalem in the usual Christian sense, but further east into lands where knowledge flowed differently, where ancient traditions were said to guard secrets lost to the West. He journeyed first to the Holy Land, then further into Arabia, Persia, and Egypt. Along the way he encountered sages, mystics, and physicians who taught him arts unknown in Europe. He learned the languages of nature, studied alchemy and astronomy, absorbed mathematics and medicine. Where European scholars were bound by church doctrine, Rosicrucian found men who pursued knowledge without fear, who mixed science with mysticism, who believed the divine was hidden not only in scripture but in the stars, in metals, in the very body of man. After years of wandering, Rosicrucian returned to Europe. He was no longer a young monk, but a man transformed by strange wisdom. He carried secrets with him, the cure of diseases, the harmonies of nature, the hidden connections between heaven and earth. Yet when he attempted to share what he had learned, he was met with mockery and suspicion. Priests denounced his ideas as heresy. Scholars rejected them as madness. Rulers dismissed them as useless dreams. The world, it seemed, was not ready for what he had brought. And so Rosicrucian turned inward. He gathered a small band of followers, only a handful of trusted companions, and with them he founded a brotherhood. Its purpose was not power or riches, but the quiet preservation and sharing of wisdom. They took vows of secrecy and humility, renouncing wealth, pledging themselves to healing, and committing to reform the world not through conquest but through knowledge. They became the fraternity of the Rosy Cross, living quietly, moving unseen, waiting for the day when the world would finally be ready. The tale does not end there. The Forma tells how Rosicrucian lived to a great age, over 100 years, and before his death, he ordered that his body and his teachings be hidden in a secret vault, to be discovered only by future generations. This tomb, said to be opened by chance 120 years later, was described in fantastical detail, a chamber lit by a mysterious sun, filled with books of wisdom, instruments of science, and treasures of art. And at its center, the uncorrupted body of Rosicrucians, as if asleep, waiting for the dawn of a new age. It is a story heavy with symbolism, rich with allegory, but historians and skeptics soon ask the obvious question: where is the evidence? There are no records of a Christian Rosicrucian in the 1300s or 1400s. No monastery claimed him, no family name matched him. The name itself, Rosicrucians, Rose Cross, seemed too perfect, too emblematic, to be anything but symbolic. Could this man ever have existed? For many, the answer was no. Christian Rosicrucians, they argued, was never a flesh-and-blood man but an invention, a cipher, a personification of an idea. His supposed travels mirrored the Renaissance fascination with the East. His vault symbolized the hidden mysteries of alchemy, and his name itself embodied the emblem of the Brotherhood. He was not history but myth, a story designed to give shape to the invisible fraternity. Yet others were not so quick to dismiss him. After all, myth and reality often blend in strange ways. Could Rosicrucians have been based on a real traveler, a forgotten alchemist whose legend was reshaped into allegory? Some speculated that he was inspired by figures like Ramon Lull, the Catalan mystic who traveled among Muslims and Christians, or by medieval pilgrims who brought back fragments of Eastern knowledge. Perhaps Rosicrucians was less a man than a mask, one worn by many seekers across the centuries. What made the story powerful was not whether it was true, but how it resonated. In an age when Europe was locked in religious conflict and intellectual stagnation, the tale of a lone seeker who crossed borders, learned from many traditions, and returned with a vision of unity was profoundly appealing. It was a myth of hope, that wisdom could transcend nations, creeds, and dogmas, that truth was not the property of one faith or one crown, but something universal. The paradox is clear. If Rosicrucians truly existed, then the Rosicrucians could claim ancient authority, a lineage stretching back centuries. But if he never existed, then his story becomes even more intriguing, a deliberate invention, a myth crafted to inspire, to gather seekers under a single symbol. Was the Brotherhood admitting, through parable, that its founder was not a man but an idea? And if so, what kind of order builds its foundation on a man who never lived? In the end, Christian Rosicrucians may not matter as a historical figure. What matters is that he became a vessel for yearning, a character who embodied what Europe desperately lacked: wisdom unchained from dogma, healing beyond superstition, unity in an age of division. He was, in essence, the man who never existed, but whose absence was more powerful than presence. For some, this was deception; for others, genius. To create a myth so compelling that it summoned followers across centuries, that was no small achievement. Rosicrucians, real or not, had given the Rosicrucians what all secret orders crave: a founder cloaked in mystery, forever unreachable, forever beckoning seekers to follow in his imagined footsteps. And so, the legend of the man who never existed endured, carried not in dusty records, but in the minds of those who believed, or who wanted to believe. To this day, his tomb has never been found, his travels never confirmed, his face never seen. And yet, in the flickering light of the Rosicrucian myth, Christian Rosicrucians lives on. In the early years of the 17th century, Europe stood trembling on the edge of transformation. Wars of religion had torn its lands apart, the fires of the Inquisition still burned, and new sciences threatened the authority of church and crown. It was an age of confusion, fear, and hope, a perfect soil for mystery to take root. And it was then, between 1614 and 1617, that three extraordinary documents appeared in the German states. Their words would ripple outward like a stone dropped into still water, sending waves that would reach across a continent. These texts became known as the Rosicrucian manifestos, the Forma Fraternitatis, the Confessio Fraternitatis, and the chemical wedding of Christian Rosicrucians. The first, the Forma Fraternitatis, or the Fame of the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross, appeared in 1614. It was short, only a few dozen pages, but its impact was electric. Written in dense, allegorical prose, it announced to the world the existence of a hidden brotherhood of enlightened men. These Rosicrucians, the text declared, were heirs to the secret wisdom of the ages, guardians of a knowledge that combined religion, science, and philosophy into a single, harmonious truth. The former told of Christian Rosicrucians, their founder, and of his travels through the East, where he learned the mysteries of nature and spirit. It described how, after his death, his tomb was discovered, a miraculous vault filled with wonders and wisdom. Above all, the former proclaimed that the Rosicrucians were working silently to heal the sick and reform the world. For readers, the message was staggering. Here was no dry theological tract, no pompous royal decree. It was a revelation, a promise that beyond the corruption of church and state, beyond the bloodshed of sectarian wars, there existed a fraternity devoted to knowledge, healing, and unity. The text ended with a call. Those who wish to join in this great reformation of the world should make themselves known, not by sending letters or declaring loyalty, but by aligning themselves with truth, humility, and the service of mankind. The Rosicrucians, it said, would find them. The following year, in 1615, came the Confessio Fraternitatis, or the Confession of the Brotherhood. If the former had introduced a legend, the Confessio gave it fire. Here the Rosicrucians declared openly that the old ways were ending, that a new age was dawning. The world, they wrote, was pregnant with great changes. Old empires would crumble, new sciences would rise, and divine truth would shine more clearly. The Brotherhood did not seek gold or power, they insisted, but the advancement of learning and the purification of faith. It was a defiant cry against ignorance and tyranny, delivered in the voice of a secret order that claimed to be both ancient and eternal. The third text was the strangest, and in many ways the most influential. Published in 1617, the chemical wedding of Christian Rosicrucians was unlike the manifestos before it. It was not a proclamation, but an allegorical tale, a dreamlike story written in the first person. Christian Rosicrucians, now portrayed as an old man, receives an invitation to a mysterious wedding in a distant castle. Over 7 days, he witnesses trials, visions, and alchemical rituals. The narrative is filled with bizarre imagery, kings and queens undergoing transformations, mystical feasts, alchemical vessels, and symbolic deaths and rebirths. At the heart of it all is the theme of spiritual transformation, the union of opposites, and the promise of enlightenment through ordeal. To modern readers, the chemical wedding might seem like a fantastical novel, rich with symbols but impenetrable in meaning. To its 17th century audience, however, it was a revelation. Alchemists saw in it the hidden processes of transmutation. Mystics read it as a guide to spiritual awakening. Reformers interpreted it as a coded manifesto of change. It was, in a sense, a puzzle designed to be solved only by those ready to see beyond appearances. Taken together, the 3 manifestos were a thunderclap. They arrived in a time when printing presses spread ideas faster than authorities could contain them, when secret societies, heresies, and reformist movements thrived in the cracks of Europe's fractured order. And they raised immediate, burning questions. Who had written them? Who were these Rosicrucians? Where could they be found? The text gave no answers. There were no addresses, no leaders, no signatures. Instead, there was only the tantalizing promise that a hidden brotherhood existed, scattered but watchful, waiting for those worthy to join. This ambiguity was its genius. By refusing to reveal themselves, the Rosicrucians ensured that their myth grew larger, not smaller. Every reader could imagine the brotherhood as they wished, a network of wise physicians, a secret cabal of alchemists, a mystical order preserved from ancient Egypt, or even a political movement disguised in allegory. The effect was immediate and chaotic. Across Europe, pamphlets and tracts exploded in response. Some praised the Rosicrucians as heralds of a golden age, allies of science and reform. Others denounced them as heretics, magicians, or agents of the devil. Letters poured forth, with scholars and seekers addressing the mysterious brotherhood in print, begging to be admitted, or offering their own wisdom in exchange for fellowship. Rival writers claimed to speak for the Rosicrucians, producing counterfeit manifestos, while critics mocked the whole affair as a hoax. But whether loved or hated, the name of the Rosicrucians was on every tongue. The manifestos did more than create a stir. They planted a seed. Out of their shadow would grow entire traditions of thought, secret societies, esoteric philosophies, mystical movements that carried the Rosicrucian ideal into future centuries. Even as wars raged and governments sought control, the idea persisted. Somewhere, beyond the reach of kings and popes, a hidden fraternity worked toward a better world. What is most remarkable is that no proof was ever required. No Rosicrucian lodge opened its doors, no leader stepped into the light. And yet, by the sheer force of myth and manuscript, they shook the intellectual and spiritual landscape of Europe. In their anonymity lay their strength. For a brotherhood that might never have existed, the Rosicrucians wielded an influence greater than most armies or rulers. The manifestos were not only texts, they were invitations to imagine a world where knowledge could heal, where science and faith were not enemies, where humanity could be remade. They were dreams written into words, and once released, no power on earth could contain them. The publication of the Rosicrucian manifestos did not fall into silence. They arrived in Europe like sparks cast into dry grass, igniting debates, passions, and fears that spread from town squares to royal courts. No one, it seemed, could remain indifferent. The air of secrecy, the bold promises of universal reformation, and the cryptic call to join a hidden brotherhood all collided with a Europe already restless with conflict. The early 17th century was a world teetering between the medieval and the modern, and the Rosicrucian texts seemed to speak to both realms at once. The first reaction was one of awe. Across the German states, in France, in Italy, in England, and beyond, scholars, philosophers, and seekers of hidden wisdom began to write responses. Learned men who had long felt trapped by rigid institutions saw in the Rosicrucians the outline of an invisible fellowship, a gathering of like-minded spirits who might rescue learning and faith from decay. For many, it was not important whether the brotherhood truly existed. The idea itself was intoxicating. A fraternity that healed the sick without demanding payment, that sought the union of science and faith, that promised to reform the world. Such a vision was irresistible to an age weary of corruption and endless war. But admiration was swiftly joined by suspicion. The Catholic Church, still reeling from the Protestant Reformation, was alert to any whisper of heresy. The notion of a secret order working outside its authority, claiming direct access to divine wisdom, struck the Inquisition like a threat. To them, the Rosicrucians sounded like magicians cloaked in Christian language, dangerous alchemists who mixed faith with forbidden arts. Pamphlets appeared warning the faithful against being seduced by this phantom brotherhood. Some denounced the manifestos as a work of Satan himself, a clever deception to lure souls from salvation. Protestants, too, were divided. Some embraced the Rosicrucian ideal as a rebuke to Catholic excess, imagining the brotherhood as reformers hidden in plain sight. Others dismissed the manifestos as Catholic trickery, a ploy to sow confusion among the Protestant states. Each faction projected its own hopes and fears onto the invisible order, so that the Rosicrucians became at once saints and villains, reformers and conspirators, depending on who spoke of them. The hunger for answers was overwhelming. Letters and pamphlets flooded the presses, written as if to the Rosicrucians themselves. If you truly exist, authors pleaded, reveal yourselves, teach us your secrets, admit us into your company. Some claimed they had already been contacted, insisting they were privy to the mysteries of the order. Others went further, publishing supposed Rosicrucian replies, counterfeit documents that muddied the waters even more. By 1620, the name of the Rosicrucians was everywhere, debated in universities, whispered about in taverns, and feared in churches. What made the reaction so explosive was the climate of Europe itself. The 30 Years' War was just beginning to cast its long shadow across the continent. Nations were splintering, alliances shifting, and the old certainties of religion and monarchy were crumbling. In such a time, the notion of a hidden brotherhood working for peace and knowledge was as radical as it was dangerous. Some rulers feared that the Rosicrucians were not mystics but political agitators, plotting revolutions under the cover of allegory. Others suspected them of being a front for rival nations, secret agents disguised as philosophers. The paranoia of the age ensured that the Rosicrucians, real or imagined, could never simply be dismissed as harmless dreamers. At the same time, a very different current was at work. Among alchemists, hermeticists, and seekers of esoteric knowledge, the manifestos became a revelation. They seemed to confirm that their hidden arts were not in vain, that somewhere in the world was fraternity of like-minded spirits who had already unlocked the secrets of transformation. To these readers, the Rosicrucians were not merely reformers, they were masters. Their silence, their refusal to step into the open, only added to the sense of grandeur. After all, true wisdom had always been veiled, hidden from the unworthy. The Rosicrucians were proof that the chain of secret knowledge stretching back to Egypt, to Solomon, to the mysteries of the East, had not been broken. But this wave of enthusiasm created chaos as well. For every genuine seeker, there were opportunists. Quacks, charlatans, and self-proclaimed Rosicrucians began to appear across Europe, offering cures, talismans, and initiation into the brotherhood for a price. The myth of the Rosicrucians became a mask that anyone could wear. In the confusion, discerning truth from fraud became nearly impossible. The very absence of a visible order meant that impostors could flourish unchecked. This turmoil reached its peak in France around 1623, when strange graffiti appeared on the walls of Paris. Anonymous messages proclaimed, "We, the brothers of the Rosy Cross, are among you." The city buzzed with speculation. Were the Rosicrucians truly walking its streets? Were they watching, recruiting, judging who might be worthy? Panic followed wonder. Authorities feared secret plots. The public imagined invisible men moving through their midst, unseen yet powerful. The Rosicrucians had become, by rumor and imagination, a haunting presence, everywhere and nowhere at once. For those who believed, the silence of the Brotherhood was a test of faith. The Rosicrucians would not be found by the impatient or the unworthy. They would reveal themselves only to the pure heart. For skeptics, the silence was proof of a fraud. How could such a grand fraternity exist and leave no trace but anonymous pamphlets? To them, the whole affair was an elaborate prank, a literary game played by mischievous scholars. Yet even these critics could not deny the effect. Whether hoax or truth, the Rosicrucians had seized the imagination of Europe. By the mid-1620s, the firestorm showed no sign of cooling. Scholars wrote entire volumes analyzing the manifestos line by line, searching for codes, allegories, hidden meanings. Physicians wondered if the Brotherhood truly possessed the power to cure all disease. Politicians whispered of conspiracies, and common folk, weary of plague and war, clung to the hope that somewhere, somehow, wise men worked in secret to bring about a better world. The Rosicrucians had achieved something unprecedented. Without armies, without rulers, without wealth or even visible existence, they had set Europe aflame. They had become an idea, a myth strong enough to stir kings and peasants alike. And in an age when the line between reality and symbol was thin, that idea was enough to change history. The question lingered, sharper than ever. Who were the Rosicrucians? Were they flesh and blood men hiding behind allegory, or a phantom, a mask worn by Europe itself, reflecting its deepest fears and highest hopes? As the Rosicrucian manifesto spread across Europe, fascination was not the only response. Suspicion, darker and more dangerous, began to take shape. In the eyes of religious authorities, a hidden order that promised a universal reformation was not merely unusual, it was threatening. At the heart of the Church's unease lay a simple but terrifying question. If such a fraternity truly existed, whose authority did it serve? God's, or its own? For the Catholic hierarchy, the timing could not have been worse. The scars of the Protestant Reformation were still raw, and every whisper of new doctrine carried the risk of rebellion. The Rosicrucians, with their talk of hidden wisdom, healing arts, and divine reform, sounded suspiciously like heretics cloaked in Christian words. Their manifestos were vague enough to avoid direct condemnation of the Church, but bold enough to suggest that the Rosicrucians held truths beyond its reach. To the guardians of orthodoxy, this was intolerable. The Inquisition, already stretched thin hunting witches, heretics, and suspected Protestants, turned its gaze toward this new phantom order. They could not arrest what they could not see, but their pens and pulpits struck hard. Preachers thundered warnings against the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross, branding them sorcerers, alchemists, and agents of the devil. Pamphlets denounced their false miracles, accusing them of trafficking with demons under the guise of enlightenment. The word Rosicrucian became, in some sermons, interchangeable with occultist or heretic. Yet what fueled the Church's anger was also its fear. The Rosicrucians claimed no wealth, no hierarchy, no armies, yet their words traveled faster and struck deeper than edicts from Rome. Unlike other sects, they had no leader to excommunicate, no headquarters to burn. Their invisibility gave them power. How could the Inquisition fight an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere? The thought gnawed at the minds of cardinals and inquisitors alike. Meanwhile, Protestant authorities faced their own dilemma. Many were drawn to the Rosicrucian ideal, imagining the Brotherhood as allies against Catholic dominance. Yet the manifesto's mystical tone unsettled the more rigid reformers. Lutherans in particular, wary of anything that smacked of magic or mysticism, warned their flocks against the seduction of hidden fraternities. The Rosicrucians, they said, were a distraction from Scripture, leading believers into dreams instead of truth. Despite the condemnations, the Rosicrucian myth continued to flourish. This paradox only deepened suspicion. If the Brotherhood could withstand such attacks, perhaps they truly did possess secret powers. Rumors spread that Rosicrucians could render themselves invisible, that they moved unseen through cities, judging the worthy and punishing the corrupt. Some claimed they could cure the plague with a touch, or summon spirits at will. The more the authorities denounced them, the more legendary the Rosicrucians became. The shadow of heresy was not only cast by the Church, but also by rival seekers of hidden knowledge. Alchemy and Hermetic philosophy had long walked a fine line between respected inquiry and forbidden practice. Many alchemists felt threatened by the Rosicrucian wave, fearing it would draw suspicion onto all who studied the secrets of nature. They accused the Brotherhood of plagiarizing their arts, or worse, of corrupting them with demonic influence. Jealousy and rivalry turned some scholars into bitter critics, feeding the fire of persecution. In this climate, to be accused of Rosicrucian sympathies was dangerous. A physician too skilled, a scholar too bold, a mystic too visionary, all could be branded as members of the invisible fraternity. And once accused, the path often led to interrogation, ruin, or the stake. The mere idea of the Rosicrucians became a weapon in the hands of enemies, a convenient charge to silence inconvenient men. Yet here lay the irony. For every denunciation, new converts appeared. To many intellectuals, the Inquisition's fury was proof of the Brotherhood's importance. Surely only dangerous truths could provoke such a reaction. The Rosicrucians, whether real or imagined, became a symbol of resistance against the tyranny of ignorance. Their secrecy gave hope to those who longed for knowledge but feared persecution. If wisdom could not survive openly, then perhaps it lived hidden in vaults and manuscripts, guarded by unseen hands. The story of the Rosicrucians also resonated with older European fears, the terror of invisible conspiracies. Medieval Europe had whispered of witches gathering in secret covens, of Jews forming clandestine networks, of heretical sects plotting the downfall of Christendom. The Rosicrucians were the latest to join this haunted gallery of unseen enemies. To the anxious mind, every unexplained event, every sudden death, every heresy uncovered could be traced back to them. They became the embodiment of mystery itself, blamed and feared for what could not be understood. Still, others dared to see in them not devils but prophets. Writers like Michael Meyer, physician to the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, openly defended the Rosicrucians, painting them as heirs to the wisdom of Pythagoras, Plato, and Solomon. In Meyer's works, the Brotherhood was no cabal of heretics but a noble lineage of philosophers, guardians of truth waiting for the right time to step forth. His defense was as much an act of courage as a scholarship, for to praise the Rosicrucians was to invite suspicion. Thus the Rosicrucians walked in shadow, to some, saviors of knowledge, to others, agents of heresy. Their name became a mirror reflecting Europe's deepest anxieties about religion, authority, science, and the unseen forces shaping the world. The Inquisition could burn books and silence voices, but it could not erase a hunger the Rosicrucian vision had awakened. By the 1620s, Europe stood divided not only by religion and politics, but also by the mystery of this brotherhood. Were the Rosicrucians truly working in secret to reform the world, or were they phantoms invented by desperate men? The answer remained elusive. But one thing was certain. The more they were hunted, the stronger their legend grew. In the halls of power, fear deepened. If the Rosicrucians were not heretics, then perhaps they were wise, revolutionaries disguised in mystic robes, plotting to overturn the order of Europe. The suspicion was enough to ensure that their shadow lingered in every chamber where secrets mattered. The line between myth and menace had blurred. And for those who lived in an age where heresy meant death, the Rosicrucians had become more than a mystery. They were a danger, real, imagined, and unstoppable. Even as preachers thundered warnings and inquisitors sharpened their quills, another current flowed beneath the surface of Europe. Among thinkers, scholars, and seekers of hidden wisdom, the Rosicrucian manifestos were not heresy but revelation. To them, the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross was not a threat. It was a promise that the old quarrels of faith and the rigid walls of authority might one day give way to a new harmony of knowledge. And some of the most brilliant minds of the age believed it. In Germany, the physician and philosopher Michael Meyer became one of the earliest and most vocal defenders of the Rosicrucians. Meyer was no obscure mystic. He served as imperial physician to Emperor Rudolf II, a ruler famed for his fascination with alchemy and the occult. To Meyer, the Rosicrucians were heirs to an unbroken chain of wisdom stretching back to antiquity. In works like the Silentium Post Clamores, he argued that the Brotherhood's silence was not proof of fraud but of integrity. True wisdom, Meyer insisted, had always been hidden, veiled from the unworthy. The Rosicrucians were no frauds. They were guardians of sacred fire, waiting for the right time to reveal their light. Meyer was not alone. Across the Channel in England, a nation already buzzing with curiosity about alchemy and natural philosophy, the manifestos struck a powerful chord. Thinkers who dreamed of a universal science, a knowledge that could unify all truth under one system, saw in the Rosicrucians kindred spirits. Francis Bacon, the great philosopher of empirical method, never declared himself a Rosicrucian. Yet many of his admirers whispered of a connection. His New Atlantis, published in 1627, imagined an island governed by a secret society of learned men devoted to the advancement of knowledge, science, and the public good. The resemblance to Rosicrucian ideals was uncanny, and in time, some would even claim that Bacon himself was a hidden Rosicrucian master. Whether true or not, Bacon's vision aligned perfectly with the Rosicrucian myth. His dream of a scientific fraternity, working in secret for the betterment of mankind, gave philosophical flesh to the manifesto's more mystical promises. To those who longed for progress, Bacon's New Atlantis and the Rosicrucian Brotherhood seemed to be two faces of the same dream, a new order built not on conquest or dogma, but on knowledge. In France, thinkers like René Descartes moved within circles where Rosicrucian rumors swirled. Though Descartes himself distanced his philosophy from the mystical, whispers persisted that he had once sought contact with the Brotherhood. His own quest for universal method, for a truth that could be proven beyond doubt, carried the echo of the Rosicrucian call for reformation. Even if he denied the connection, the shadow of the Rosy Cross touched his era's intellectual atmosphere. Nor was the influence confined to great names. Across Europe, lesser-known scholars and visionaries embraced the Rosicrucian promise. Johann Valentin Andreae, often suspected of involvement in the original manifestos, later claimed the texts were meant as allegory, a kind of serious jest. Yet whether Andreae was mocking, instructing, or concealing, the impact of the works went far beyond his intent. Students of alchemy and natural philosophy took the Rosicrucians as proof that they were not isolated dreamers but part of a larger, hidden fellowship. For many, the Rosicrucians represented a bridge between faith and reason, between science and spirituality, between the ancient mysteries and the new dawn of modern inquiry. In their myth, philosophers could find legitimacy for pursuits often ridiculed or condemned. Alchemy was no longer the obsession of a few solitary experimenters. It was a sacred science of a brotherhood sworn to heal humanity. Astronomy, medicine, and natural philosophy were no longer scattered fields, but parts of a greater whole. What drew philosophers most was the manifesto's vision of service. The Rosicrucians claimed to cure the sick without charge, to labor for mankind rather than for riches or power. In an age when scholars often depended on the patronage of princes and nobles, the idea of society beyond such corruption was intoxicating. Knowledge, the Rosicrucians declared, was not for sale. It was a gift, a duty, a calling. For those weary of compromises, this purity of purpose was irresistible. Of course, belief carried risks. To praise the Rosicrucians openly was to invite suspicion of heresy or gullibility. Some philosophers who admired the Brotherhood did so cautiously, speaking in allegories or coded language. Others were bolder, publishing defenses and elaborations, weaving Rosicrucian ideals into their own writings. Whether cautious or bold, they ensured that the idea of the Brotherhood seeped deeper into Europe's intellectual bloodstream. Perhaps the most striking aspect of these believers was their willingness to suspend disbelief. Few had seen a Rosicrucian, and no one could prove the Brotherhood's existence. Yet for men like Meyer, Bacon's admirers, and countless others, the reality of the Rosicrucians was less important than the truth they represented. They were an emblem of possibility, of a better world hidden just beyond reach. In believing, philosophers transformed the Rosicrucians from anonymous texts into a living, breathing ideal. The power of myth, once embraced by brilliant minds, became more dangerous than any single army or institution. Ideas carried in books could be burned, but ideas carried in hearts could not be destroyed. The philosophers who believed ensured that the Rosicrucians would not vanish with the fading of pamphlets. Instead, they would grow, woven into the very fabric of the scientific revolution and the enlightenment to come. By the 1630s, even as wars raged and Europe tore itself apart, the Rosicrucian dream endured in the minds of scholars. Some argued for its mystical essence, others for its scientific promise, still others for its political potential. The details mattered less than the vision. The Rosicrucians, real or not, had become a beacon, a symbol of a world where knowledge and spirit worked hand in hand. And yet, belief came with its own dangers. For the more philosophers embraced the brotherhood, the more enemies sharpened their blades. To the suspicious eye of the Inquisition, to rulers guarding their fragile thrones, a fraternity of visionary thinkers sounded perilously close to conspiracy. If philosophers could believe in the Rosicrucians, then what plots might they hatch under its banner? Thus, as Europe's intellectuals drew inspiration from the Rosicrucians, another storm was brewing, one that would test how far this dream of hidden wisdom could go before it collided with the realities of power. At the center of the Rosicrucian myth lay not politics, not philosophy, but alchemy. To the uninitiated, alchemy was a quest to turn lead into gold, a childish dream of wealth conjured through smoke and symbols. But to those who looked deeper, alchemy was never merely about metals. It was a great science of transformation, a sacred art that mirrored the very structure of the cosmos. The Rosicrucian manifestos promised not just social or religious renewal, but alchemical rebirth, a reformation of humanity itself, refined in the crucible of hidden knowledge. For centuries, alchemists had worked in secrecy, their books written in riddles, their laboratories filled with furnaces, retorts, and strange symbols. To outsiders, they were charlatans. To their disciples, they were philosophers wrestling with the mysteries of creation. The Rosicrucians claimed descent from this tradition. Their founder, the legendary Christian Rosicrucian, was said to have studied alchemy in Arabia, Egypt, and Morocco, gathering wisdom from sages who preserved truths forgotten in the West. In the vault where his body was discovered, so the manifestos declared, lay not only treasures but texts of the most profound alchemical knowledge, sealed away until the world was ready. To understand the Rosicrucians' appeal, one must grasp what alchemy truly represented. At its heart, alchemy was about purification. Just as base metals could be refined into gold, so too could the human soul be elevated, freed from corruption and ignorance. The philosopher's stone, that most elusive of treasures, was not simply a substance but a symbol. It promised eternal wisdom, the healing of all disease, and the unification of spirit and matter. In a world fractured by war, plague, and dogma, the promise of such transformation was irresistible. The Rosicrucians proclaimed that they had mastered this art, not to enrich themselves, but to heal the world. They claimed the ability to cure the sick without charge, a radical promise in an era where medicine was often crude, costly, and tied to superstition. Imagine the appeal to a weary people, a brotherhood who could banish suffering, who labored not for gold or power but for the well-being of all. Whether or not they truly possessed such powers was almost secondary. The very idea cast a spell. Alchemical symbolism permeated their writings. The rosy cross itself, scholars argued, was an emblem of the union of opposites, the red rose of passion, blood, and earthly life entwined with a wooden cross of suffering and transcendence. It was the alchemical marriage, the reconciliation of sun and moon, spirit and matter, man and God. Every page of the manifestos seemed to pulse with these hidden meanings, inviting readers to see not only with their eyes but with their inner vision. For philosophers steeped in alchemical lore, the message was clear. The Rosicrucians were offering nothing less than the philosopher's stone, not in a vial of liquid gold, but in the transformation of humanity itself. Their reformation of the whole wide world was alchemy on the grandest possible scale, the transmutation of history. This vision resonated with the broader intellectual currents of the time. Natural philosophers were beginning to systematize experiments, to seek laws beneath the apparent chaos of nature. Alchemy, with its promise of hidden order, seemed less superstition than precursor to true science. In Rosicrucian texts, Seekers found a synthesis, the mystical fire of alchemy joined with a rational hope of discovery. Here was a path where science and spirit did not clash but converged. And yet, alchemy was always double-edged. Its language was secretive, its processes hidden. Those who pursued it without guidance often ended in madness or ruin, poisoning themselves with mercury or burning their fortunes in futile experiments. The Rosicrucian silence, refusing to reveal themselves publicly, only heightened the mystique. Were they protecting sacred secrets from the unworthy, or was their promise as elusive as the stone itself? This tension gave the Brotherhood its power. They might hold the key, but they revealed it only through allegory and symbol, forcing seekers to embark on their own inner transformations. In this way, alchemy was not only a science but a test of character. The true alchemist was patient, disciplined, humble before the mysteries of nature. The Rosicrucians, by cloaking their wisdom in secrecy, ensured that only the sincere would persist. Those who mocked the demanded quick results were left in darkness. Those who endured the long labor of study might, perhaps, catch a glimpse of gold. The manifestos themselves became alchemical texts, enigmatic, layered, open to endless interpretation. Every reader saw something different, a spiritual allegory, a scientific prophecy, a political code. Like the philosopher's crucible, the Rosicrucian writings transformed not only metals but minds. In trying to decipher them, seekers underwent the very purification the Brotherhood demanded. For believers, this was proof of authenticity. The Rosicrucians were not mere charlatans but true adepts, guiding humanity through veils of symbol and allegory. Their secrecy was a hallmark of the real initiate, not the impostor. And so, in laboratories across Europe, candles burned late into night as alchemists pored over the manifestos, searching for hidden formulas, secret correspondences, the whisper of a process that might turn both lead and life into something higher. But alchemy was never purely individual. The Rosicrucians spoke of fraternity, of collective labor. The stone was not to be hoarded by one man, but shared for the healing of all. This struck at the heart of the alchemical tradition, which for centuries had been solitary, secretive, often selfish. Here was a brotherhood that promised to dissolve isolation itself, to bind seekers into a greater whole. In that promise lay their most radical alchemy, the transformation of community. By the time whispers of the Rosicrucians reached their height, alchemy itself was evolving. The old quest of metallic gold was giving way to the search for universal principles, the beginnings of modern chemistry. In this shifting landscape, the Rosicrucians stood as a bridge. They carried forward the ancient symbols, yet they also pointed toward the future, a science that would heal, unify, and enlighten. Their heart, then, was not a laboratory but a vision in which alchemy was not about hidden furnaces and cellars, but about the transformation of the world itself. Every plague cured, every soul uplifted, every barrier between faith and reason dissolved. This was their true great work. Whether they existed or not, the myth of their alchemical heart gave birth to hope, and hope, like gold, could not be easily tarnished. And yet, as with all alchemy, fire was needed. The furnace of history was not gentle, and in the decades that followed, the Rosicrucian dream will be tested in the flames of suspicion, fear, and betrayal. Could the alchemical heart of the Brotherhood survive the crucible of reality? Or would it, like so many failed experiments, collapse into ash and disappointment? The Rosicrucian dream of a universal reformation, of an enlightened brotherhood healing the wounds of Europe, might have been inspiring to some, but to others it was a threat. In the 17th century, when faith and power were woven tightly together, whispers of secret societies and hidden knowledge could not be tolerated without scrutiny. To the Catholic Inquisition and to certain Protestant authorities as well, the Rosicrucians sounded less like reformers and more like heretics, dangerous minds cloaked in piety, plotting in shadows. The Inquisition had long been Europe's watchdog of orthodoxy. Its memory stretched back through centuries of trials against Cathars, Templars, witches, and suspected heretics of every kind. Whenever rumors of secret knowledge surfaced, the inquisitors grew alert. The Rosicrucians' promises of curing disease, reshaping society, and uncovering hidden wisdom bore the scent of forbidden magic. Alchemy, though practiced even by princes, was still linked in many minds to necromancy. And the language of the manifestos, enigmatic, symbolic, defiantly universalist, reeked of danger to those who guarded the purity of faith. It was not only the Inquisition, Protestant theologians, too, found reason for suspicion. Martin Luther had torn down the edifice of Catholic tradition, but Protestant leaders were no less wary of groups who claimed secret authority. A brotherhood that did not publicly declare itself, that spoke of hidden vaults and secret initiations, struck at the very foundations of truth as they understood it. If God's revelation was clear and sufficient in Scripture, what need was there for veiled orders offering greater light? For both Catholic and Protestant authorities, the Rosicrucian claims seemed arrogant, if not outright blasphemous. Rumors grew quickly. Pamphlets accused the Brotherhood of dealing in demonic arts, of manipulating nature through forbidden means, of conspiring against church and crown alike. The very anonymity of the order made them all the more terrifying. When enemies cannot see their opponent, they invent him in monstrous form. The Rosicrucians were imagined as invisible puppeteers, steering politics, spreading heresy, and undermining divine order. The timing made matters worse. Europe was already inflamed by the first stirrings of the 30 Years' War, a conflict that would soon drench the continent in blood. Religious paranoia was everywhere. In such a climate, even an innocent word could be twisted into treason. How much more, then, could be done with the Rosicrucians' cryptic manifestos? Their talk of hidden vaults, of chosen initiates, of secret cures, sounded less like philosophy and more like conspiracy. Authorities began to search for signs of their presence. In some cities, men accused of alchemy were suddenly suspected of being Rosicrucians. Strange gatherings, intellectual salons, even scientific experiments could be painted with a brush of suspicion. In some regions, arrests followed. Those who were merely curious readers of the manifestos risked being marked as accomplices in a hidden heresy. Fear spread like fire, and with fear came whispers of persecution. But the Rosicrucians themselves, if they truly existed, remained silent. No public leaders stepped forward. No central lodge was uncovered. The more their enemies searched, the less they found. And in that void, imagination bloomed. To some, this was proof of the order's cunning. To others, it suggested that the Brotherhood might be nothing more than smoke and rumor. The inquisitors faced a dilemma. How do you hunt what you cannot see? How do you prosecute an order that never shows its face? Yet suspicion had a momentum of its own. For centuries, the specter of the hidden enemy had justified harsh measures. The Templars had been crushed on charges of heresy and secrecy, charges that in many ways echoed those now leveled at the Rosicrucians. Authorities asked themselves, were these manifestos the beginning of another Templar-like movement, a new power rising beneath the cloak of spirituality? If so, should it not be extinguished before it grew too strong? And yet, here lay the irony. The Rosicrucians' invisibility also protected them. No great trial was ever staged, no burning pyres filled with Rosicrucian martyrs. The order was too elusive to strike. All that remained was suspicions, pamphlets, denunciations, and counter-denunciations. For every enemy who condemned them as sorcerers, there were others who defended them as wise men maligned by ignorance. This very dance between suspicion and absence fed the legend. The Rosicrucians became the perfect riddle, feared by inquisitors, doubted by skeptics, longed for by seekers. Their secrecy was both curse and shield. The authorities could not destroy them, because no proof of their existence could be pinned down. The Brotherhood lived, in a sense, in the imagination of Europe, untouchable by the flames of the stake. Still, the climate of suspicion left its scars. Many alchemists and natural philosophers who admired the Rosicrucians learned to guard their words carefully. Some chose to cloak their studies in religious language, presenting experiments as acts of devotion. Others distanced themselves, denying any link to the mysterious order. The fear of persecution was real, and the boundaries between curiosity and heresy were perilously thin. The Inquisition, frustrated, eventually turned its gaze to other enemies, witches, secret Protestants, unrepentant heretics. But the shadow of suspicion remained. In taverns, in churches, in whispered conversations, the Rosicrucians lingered as a possible threat, a hidden brotherhood whose ambitions, whether noble or sinister, could never be fully known. And yet, paradoxically, the more they were condemned, the more famous they became. Pamphlets written to denounce them only spread their name further. Satirical plays mocked them, yet by mocking also introduced them to new audiences. The very attempt to destroy their reputation gave them endurance. The inquisitors had meant to silence the Brotherhood. Instead, they amplified its voice across Europe. Thus, the Rosicrucians entered a strange twilight. Neither saints nor devils, neither proven fact nor dismissed fiction. They lived on in the gap between suspicion and proof. And in that gap, their influence grew. For seekers hungry for hidden truth, the condemnation of the authorities was not a deterrent but a validation. After all, if the powerful feared them, might that not prove that they truly possessed secret wisdom? The inquisitors had set out to guard the truth of the faith, to protect Christendom from corruption. But in doing so, they unwittingly made the Rosicrucians immortal. Suspicion had forged a legend, and as Europe descended deeper into the chaos of the 30 Years' War, the Brotherhood, real or imagined, would take on new roles in the minds of those desperate for meaning. For in the smoke and fire of war, people looked even more urgently for hidden saviors. As the Rosicrucian name echoed across Europe, half whispered in awe, half cursed in suspicion, an even stranger phenomenon began to emerge. Groups of thinkers, scientists, philosophers, and mystics began meeting in secret, drawn together by the shared dream that the manifestos had ignited. They called themselves by many names: circles, brotherhoods, societies. But one term would come to capture their spirit best: the invisible college. Unlike universities, which were bound by dogma and political ties, these informal gatherings were fluid, unrecorded, and often transient. They had no fixed buildings, no official patrons. Instead, they were living networks of minds, scattered across Europe yet somehow connected by a shared yearning for hidden truth. Letters carried coded hints of experiments and philosophical debates. Manuscripts traveled quietly from hand to hand. Meetings were held in backrooms, taverns, and private chambers, always out of sight of the authorities. The dream of the invisible college was not simply secrecy for its own sake. It was survival. In an age where suspicion could condemn a man to the stake, seekers of unorthodox knowledge had no choice but to cloak themselves. If universities were guarded by theologians, the invisible colleges were guarded by silence. But within that silence, a daring idea flourished. What if knowledge could be pursued free from the chains of doctrine? What if truth belonged not to the church or the crown, but to the patient seeker who tested, questioned, and discovered? The Rosicrucian manifestos had never called for the founding of such societies, but their mysterious promises seemed to give permission. If a hidden brotherhood could exist, why not many? If wisdom could be veiled in allegory, why not protect new science in the same way? And so, scattered across Germany, England, France, and Italy, the invisible colleges began to take shape. Their activities were eclectic. Some discussed alchemy, not only as a transmutation of metals, but as a metaphor for transformation in medicine, philosophy, and religion. Others experimented with lenses, prisms, and telescopes, trying to capture the secrets of light and stars. There were physicians who tested herbs and minerals, astronomers who charted the skies, and engineers who toyed with machines that seemed half magical. What bound them was not one subject but one attitude: the belief that knowledge was infinite and that the official keepers of wisdom were blind to its true scope. In England, one such group began to meet under the loose name of the Invisible College, a term that would later echo in history. Figures like Robert Boyle, Robert Hooke, and other early natural philosophers gathered to share their observations, often in defiance of the rigid scholasticism that dominated universities. To these men, the Rosicrucian myth served as both warning and inspiration. The Rosicrucians had remained hidden, and thus had escaped destruction. But what if their secrecy could be transformed into openness, not a hidden vault, but a shared enterprise? This invisible network was dangerous in its subtlety. It had no charter, no fixed leaders. Its influence spread not through decrees but through curiosity, carried like sparks from one mind to another. A scholar in Paris might read a Rosicrucian tract and begin a small discussion circle. A physician in Prague might exchange letters with a colleague in London. An alchemist in Leyden might correspond with a mathematician in Florence. None of them claimed to be Rosicrucians, yet all were bound by the Rosicrucian spirit, the conviction that there were truths hidden beneath appearances, and that these truths could be uncovered by the devoted seeker. The authorities, who sought centralized control, could not easily suppress what they could not see. To dissolve one circle was meaningless, for 3 others would rise elsewhere. And because the invisible colleges had no banner, no official creed, they could not be accused of heresy in the same way a sect could. They were shadows, reflections, whispers. To some, they were the seedlings of a new age of reason. To others, they were the silent spread of heresy under another name. The Rosicrucian myth thus mutated. No longer was it only about a hidden brotherhood guarding ancient wisdom. Now it was about the possibility that wisdom could flow invisibly across Europe, shaping minds without ever revealing a single master. In this way, the invisible colleges were more than gatherings. They were proof of an idea, that knowledge itself could be invisible, moving beneath the surface of official power like an underground river, unstoppable and uncontainable. These meetings also created something new, trust between strangers. In a time of constant suspicion, trust was revolutionary. One could not enter an invisible college without a reputation for sincerity, for curiosity, for discretion. This quiet fraternity mirrored the Rosicrucian promise of brotherhood, but it stripped away the mystical veil. Instead of secret vaults and allegorical texts, the invisible colleges dealt with glass lenses, chemical reactions, and a careful recording of results. They were halfway between myth and modernity, a bridge from the Rosicrucian dream to the scientific revolution. But secrecy was a double-edged sword. The same silence that protected these groups also bred paranoia. Were all invisible colleges truly devoted to knowledge, or was some masked for darker designs? Were Rosicrucians among them, guiding from the shadows, or had the myth merely been a spark that others carried forward? No one could say for certain. The ambiguity only deepened the fascination. In time, some invisible colleges would step into the light. In England, they would evolve into the Royal Society, the world's first great scientific institution. But in the early 1600s, they were still half-formed, still fragile, still cloaked in the fear of persecution. To those who participated, every meeting carried a thrill of danger and wonder, the sense that they were part of something bigger than themselves, something that might one day change the course of history. The Rosicrucians had promised the reformation of the whole wide world. The invisible colleges, whether knowingly or not, began to fulfill that promise. They carried the torch from secrecy toward openness, from allegory toward experiment, from hidden vaults to laboratories where truth could be tested. In their hands, the Rosicrucian vision ceased to be only a legend. It became a living force, woven into the birth of modern science. And yet, even as some circles moved toward daylight, others clung to the shadows. The hunger for mystery, for secret initiation, for sacred wisdom never vanished. In the next generation, the Rosicrucian myth would intertwine with something even more ambitious, a society that promised not only knowledge but mastery of the very architecture of the universe. For from the invisible colleges would arise a fraternity whose name still resonates with secrecy and power, the Freemasons. As the 17th century unfolded, the Rosicrucian legend did not fade into silence. Instead, it began to merge, evolve, and whisper through another society that would come to dominate the imagination of Europe, the Freemasons. At first glance, the Masons were something very different. They traced their origins not to mystics or alchemists, but to medieval stoneworkers' guilds, practical men who built cathedrals, castles, and the monuments of kings. Their symbols were squares, compasses, and tools of the trade. Their rituals celebrated craftsmanship, discipline, and loyalty to the brotherhood. And yet, as the lodges of Freemasonry transformed in the 17th and 18th centuries into philosophical fraternities, something uncanny appeared. The old Rosicrucian echoes began to vibrate in their halls. It was not coincidence. The invisible colleges that grew from the Rosicrucian dream overlapped in time and spirit with the early speculative lodges of Masonry. Both drew upon allegory, symbolism, and a language of hidden wisdom. Both offered initiations that promised not just membership, but transformation, and both proclaimed a devotion to universal truths that transcended the narrow boundaries of church or state. The Rosicrucians had declared themselves invisible. The Freemasons, while more public, clothed themselves in rituals just as enigmatic. Across Europe, seekers of hidden knowledge found in Freemasonry a new vessel for their hopes. The manifestos of the Rosicrucians had promised a brotherhood dedicated to healing and enlightenment, but no one could ever find their lodges or leaders. The Masons, however, provided physical lodges, gatherings, and rituals that could be joined, rituals filled with symbols, passwords, and allegories reminiscent of Rosicrucian texts. It was as though the Rosicrucian dream had stepped into flesh, exchanging the ghostly veil of legend for the solid walls of lodge rooms. The The parallels were striking. The Rosicrucians had spoken of the Rosy Cross, a symbol of suffering and transcendence entwined with hidden wisdom. The Masons, too, placed supreme importance on symbols, the unfinished pyramid, the all-seeing eye, the blazing star. Each symbol invited endless interpretation. Each whispered of truth beyond the obvious. In both traditions, the initiate was not simply admitted but reborn, transformed by knowledge disguised as ritual drama. Historians still debate how direct the link was. Did Rosicrucians infiltrate early Masonic lodges, bringing their myths with them? Or were both movements simply products of the same age of upheaval, responding in parallel to the hunger for secret wisdom? The answer may never be fully known, but the resemblance was enough that many contemporaries themselves drew the connection. Pamphlet began to describe Masonry as a continuation of Rosicrucian ideals, the visible successor to an invisible order. And within Masonic law itself, whispers of Rosicrucian descent grew stronger over time. One of the most intriguing overlaps lay in the idea of architecture, not only of buildings, but of knowledge. The Rosicrucians had promised a house of the Holy Spirit, a hidden vault where the treasures of wisdom were kept. The Freemasons spoke of Solomon's Temple, a sacred architecture whose stones were not only literal but symbolic, each member himself a living stone in the construction of a greater order. Both visions use a language of building to describe the reformation of humanity. Both suggested that the initiate was a worker in a cosmic construction project, laboring toward a perfected world. The emotional resonance of this overlap was profound. To live in the turbulence of 17th century Europe was to feel that the old world was crumbling. Wars, plagues, and schisms shattered the sense of stability. In such a climate, the promise that one was part of a hidden project, part of a great architecture of renewal, gave meaning to chaos. The Freemasons carried this torch, and in doing so, they carried the Rosicrucian spirit into a new age. But Masonry also did what the Rosicrucians could not. It created permanence. Lodges had addresses. Membership was recorded. Rituals were codified. This gave seekers not only a dream but a place to belong. Men who had longed for the elusive Rosicrucian order, frustrated by its silence, now found a fellowship that embodied many of the same ideals: fraternity, secrecy, transformation, while allowing them to gather openly under the guise of a guild. Over time, Freemasonry became a magnet for intellectuals, scientists, and reformers. The same kinds of minds who would once have pored over Rosicrucian manifestos now joined Masonic lodges. Figures of the Enlightenment, philosophers, inventors, statesmen, brought their energy to its halls. And as Masonry spread from Europe to the New World, its lodges became incubators of revolution and reform. In this sense, the Rosicrucian seed blossomed far beyond what its anonymous authors could have imagined. Yet Masonry also reshaped the Rosicrucian inheritance. Where the Rosicrucians had leaned heavily on mystical allegory, the Freemasons blended that mysticism with practical ethics, philanthropy, and a philosophy of progress. Their secrecy was real, but it was paired with a public presence, charity, political influence, cultural prestige. The Rosicrucians had vanished into myth. The Freemasons became a visible force in the shaping of nations. Still, beneath the veneer of Masonry, the Rosicrucian echoes remained. The dream of hidden wisdom, the promise of transformation, the sense that behind the symbols lay truths too profound for ordinary words. Some members even sought to make the connection explicit. In the 18th century, strands of Masonic ritual incorporated Rosicrucian themes directly, giving rise to so-called Rosicrucian degrees. These rituals drew on the imagery of the Rosy Cross, alchemical allegories, and even stories of Christian Rosicrucian himself. For those who longed to link their lodge to the legendary brotherhood, these rituals offered the missing bridge. They transformed Masonry into not only a guild of builders, but a temple of hidden wisdom. The Rosicrucians had never been caught, never revealed, never fully explained. And so, their silence was filled by the voices of others. The Freemasons became, in many eyes, their heirs. Whether by design or by the imagination of seekers, the two fraternities became entwined in the cultural memory of Europe. To this day, when one hears of Masonry, the echo of Rosicrucian myth is never far behind. Thus, the Rosicrucian story did not end with suspicion and pamphlets. It lived on in rituals, in lodges, in the very birth of modern secret societies. From the silence of an invisible order grew the thunder of a fraternity that would shape revolutions and influence empires. And in this transformation, the Rosicrucians achieved a kind of immortality, not through their own survival, but through the echo of their vision in the architecture of Freemasonry. But the story does not rest here. For just as Masonry carried the Rosicrucian seed into the Enlightenment, so too would other thinkers, poets, and visionaries seize upon it, transforming the Rosicrucian dream into something at once more personal and more universal. The myth would take root in the imagination of individuals who saw themselves as heirs of hidden wisdom, seekers of the eternal flame. Among them would rise some of the most celebrated names of European literature and philosophy. The Rosicrucian dream did not remain confined to secret lodges or whispered rituals. It spilled into the very heart of European art and philosophy. If the manifestos had once been a spark in the darkness, poets and philosophers took that spark and transformed it into fire. They found in the Rosicrucian myth a language for longing, for transcendence, for the mysterious order behind chaos. For some, it was a genuine faith in hidden brotherhoods. For others, it was a symbol, a metaphor for the possibility of inner transformation. Either way, the Rosicrucians haunted the imagination of Europe's greatest minds. No figure demonstrates this more vividly than Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, the towering giant of German letters. Goethe was fascinated by alchemy, symbolism, and the hidden architecture of nature. In his Faust, one can hear the echo of Rosicrucian ideals, the pact with hidden powers, the quest for ultimate knowledge, the blending of science, spirituality, and danger. Goethe studied esoteric texts, and though he may not have been a Rosicrucian initiate, the atmosphere of Rosicrucian thought pervades his work. He saw the world as a living organism, pulsing with symbols, waiting to be decoded. A view not far from the Rosicrucian promise that nature itself concealed divine secrets. The English poet William Blake, too, breathed life into Rosicrucian imagery. His illuminated books shimmer with crosses of light, mystical roses, and visions of spiritual brotherhood. Blake's radical imagination was nourished by esoteric streams that flowed from Rosicrucianism into Freemasonry and beyond. To him, the Rosicrucian myth was not a curiosity of pamphlets, but a living reality. His angels, his fiery wheels, his eternal Albion, all carried the sense that behind the veil of ordinary sight lay a cosmic order glimpsed only by the visionary. Blake's declaration that imagination is not a state, it is a human existence itself, could almost serve as a Rosicrucian creed. The philosophers, too, were not untouched. German idealists like Hegel and Schelling spoke in terms of spirit, unfolding reason, and the unity of opposites. Their language often echoed alchemical transformation, the very heart of Rosicrucian allegory. Schelling in particular envisioned nature as a visible revelation of the divine, a text waiting to be read by those with eyes to see. Though he wrote as a philosopher rather than an initiate, the Rosicrucian spirit, this sense of hidden correspondences and symbolic depths, saturated the intellectual air he breathed. Even scientists felt the pull. Isaac Newton, known today as the father of modern physics, was also a devoted student of alchemy. His notebooks overflow with experiments, cryptic diagrams, and speculations on hidden wisdom. While he may never have claimed the title of Rosicrucian, his life reveals how porous the boundaries were between science and mysticism. To the modern eye, Newton stands at the dawn of rational science, yet in his own mind, he was equally an explorer of divine mysteries, much like the Rosicrucians had declared themselves to be. The Rosicrucian myth thus acted as a prism through which the age refracted its desires. To the Romantic poets, it was a symbol of imagination sovereignty. To philosophers, it was an emblem of hidden unity in the unfolding of history and spirit. To scientists, it was a reminder that nature might yet conceal secrets not revealed by experiment alone. The Rosicrucian order may never have gathered in real lodges, but in the minds of Europe's visionaries, it was very much alive. What made this myth so compelling? Perhaps it was the ambiguity. The Rosicrucians were neither wholly religious nor wholly scientific. They were not political, yet their ideas hinted at revolution. They were invisible, yet their pamphlets ignited imaginations everywhere. This vagueness made them a mirror. Each poet, each thinker, could see in them what he most desired. For Goethe, they were seekers of nature's secret harmony. For Blake, they were warriors of spiritual vision. For philosophers, they were the hidden guardians of wisdom. For radicals, they were a fraternity of change. This power of projection is what allowed the Rosicrucians to endure when so many other secret societies faded. They were not defined by rigid dogma. They were not anchored to one place or leader. Instead, they existed as an idea, fluid, adaptable, capable of inspiring generation after generation. The poets and philosophers gave them flesh in language, in verse, in metaphysics. And thus, the Rosicrucian brotherhood, even if never tangible in the flesh, became immortal in culture. The imagination of the age also began to blend Rosicrucian imagery with Christian mysticism, classical allegory, and the rising fascination with Eastern philosophies. The Rosy Cross itself became a canvas onto which endless meanings were painted: suffering and redemption, unity of opposites, the marriage of heaven and earth. In poetry and philosophy, the symbol took on a life of its own, migrating far from the pamphlets of 1614 and entering the bloodstream of European thought. For the Romantics, particularly, the Rosicrucian myth offered a way to reconcile the rational and the irrational, the scientific and the mystical. They lived in an age when science was advancing rapidly, yet they feared the coldness of reason stripped of spirit. The Rosicrucians seemed to offer a model of synthesis, a path where knowledge did not banish mystery but deepened it, where the study of nature led not to disenchanted mechanics but to awe before the divine. Thus, in the hands of poets and philosophers, the Rosicrucians ceased to be only a secret order. They became archetypes. They represented the eternal figure of the seeker, the one who looks beyond appearances, who dares to believe that reality hides a deeper truth. And in this form, they inspired countless works of art, poetry, and philosophy, works that continue to shape how we think about imagination, science, and spirit today. The Rosicrucian imagination did more than survive. It flourished. It became part of the cultural DNA of the West. Even now, echoes of its surface whenever a poet writes of hidden gardens, whenever a philosopher speaks of unseen unity, whenever a scientist senses that mystery still shrouds the universe. The Rosicrucians may have been invisible, but in the imagination of poets and philosophers, they became impossible to ignore. And yet, the myth had further ground to cover. For if the Rosicrucians had inspired thinkers and artists, they would soon find themselves woven into the tapestry of entire societies, secret orders, occult revivals, and esoteric movements that would reshape modern spirituality. What began as pamphlets in 17th century Germany was now ready to expand across continents, centuries, and cultures. The 19th century was an age of revolutions, not only political and industrial but spiritual as well. Beneath the clamor of machines, the rise of factories, and the promise of science, there pulsed a countercurrent, a longing for mystery, for hidden truths, for a wisdom that could not be reduced to numbers or machines. The Rosicrucian myth, which had once haunted poets and philosophers, now found fertile soil in the hearts of mystics, occultists, and seekers who craved something beyond the iron grip of material progress. What emerged was a renaissance of esoteric orders, revivals of forgotten traditions, and new societies that wrapped themselves in Rosicrucian symbols. Paris became one of the great crucibles of this revival. In candlelit salons and secret lodges, men and women gathered to invoke ancient names and claim descent from invisible masters. The French occultist Eliphas Levi stands as a towering figure here. A former seminarian turned magician and mystic, Levi's writings blended Catholic mysticism, Kabbalah, and magical philosophy into a new synthesis. He invoked the Rosicrucians as part of a timeless brotherhood of light, keepers of the Prisca Theologia, the eternal wisdom said to stretch from Egypt to the present day. Levi's iconic image of the Baphomet, both angelic and monstrous, embodied the Rosicrucian fascination with unity of opposites, light and darkness, spirit and matter, redemption hidden in suffering. In Germany, the myth was equally alive. Small circles of initiates declared themselves heirs of the Rosy Cross, blending alchemical symbolism with Christian mysticism. They claimed that the fraternity had never died, only gone deeper underground. These lodges offered elaborate initiation rituals, sacred texts, and the promise that members were joining not merely a club but a lineage that stretched back to the hidden brothers of the 17th century. Whether their claims were fact or fiction mattered less than the sense of belonging to a grand story, an invisible tradition of seekers, rebels, and sages. But the revival did not stop in Europe. Across the Atlantic, America too became a haven for Rosicrucian ideas. In the United States, spiritual ferment was everywhere, Revivalist preachers stirred crowds in tent meetings, while spiritualists claimed to converse with the dead. Into this atmosphere, the Rosicrucian myth slipped easily, often blending with Freemasonry. Groups like the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, later influencing American branches, tied themselves to Masonic traditions. Their teachings were dressed in robes and rituals, but beneath the surface they sought the same thing the manifestos had promised centuries earlier: the transformation of the soul, the healing of society, and the unveiling of nature's secret wisdom. The rise of theosophy in the late 19th century further amplified the Rosicrucian current. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, co-founder of the Theosophical Society, spoke of hidden masters dwelling in the Himalayas, guiding humanity toward a new age of spiritual awakening. While Blavatsky did not claim to be Rosicrucian, the parallels were unmistakable. The very idea of invisible adepts guiding humanity from the shadows resonated deeply with the Rosicrucian mythos. For many seekers, the Rosicrucians were folded into this larger story of occult wisdom, with Blavatsky's masters viewed as kin to the hidden brethren of the Rosy Cross. At the same time, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn emerged in Britain, fusing Kabbalah, tarot, astrology, and ceremonial magic into a vast symbolic system. Its founders borrowed liberally from Rosicrucian motifs, seeing themselves as heirs to the same great tradition. In the Golden Dawn's rituals, initiates passed through symbolic deaths and rebirths, just as the Rosicrucian manifestos had hinted at transformation through trials and secrecy. The Rosy Cross itself was a central emblem, standing not only for Christ but for the union of the finite and the infinite, the earthly and the divine. What made the 19th century's occult revival so powerful was a contrast it offered to modernity. As factories belched smoke and railroads cut across landscapes, many felt that mystery was vanishing from the world. The Rosicrucian revival's promise that mystery was not gone, it had only gone underground, waiting for initiates to rediscover it. In a century of revolutions, Rosicrucian orders claimed to offer a deeper revolution, not of governmental machines, but of the soul. They suggested that behind the coldness of rational science there remained a living wisdom that could guide humanity to balance, harmony, and spiritual ascent. The revival also carried with it a certain theatricality. Initiations were filled with veils, candles, sacred words, and symbols that spoke to the imagination as much as to reason. The power of the Rosicrucian name was such that even societies with little direct connection to the original manifestos invoked it to lend legitimacy and allure. To say one was Rosicrucian was to claim access to secrets hidden since antiquity, to align oneself with a brotherhood older than nations. And yet, questions lingered. Were these 19th century orders truly heirs to a secret tradition, or were they inventing continuity where none existed? Historians suggest that most of these groups were more revival than survival, drawing inspiration rather than lineage. But to the initiates themselves, the distinction may not have mattered. Belief itself gave power. The sense of being part of an invisible fraternity of wisdom transformed lives, granting courage, meaning, and the intoxicating promise that one's struggles were part of a cosmic drama. The Rosicrucian myth in the 19th century thus entered a new phase. No longer confined to pamphlets or poets, it became embodied in organizations, lodges, and movements that sought to make the invisible visible. The myth that had once traveled by rumor and imagination now had meeting halls, robes, and rituals. And as these groups expanded, they prepared the ground for what would come in the 20th century, a proliferation of Rosicrucian societies, each claiming to guard the true wisdom, each competing for the mantle of authenticity. The revival of the 19th century was more than nostalgia. It was a re-enchantment of a world being stripped bare by science and industry. It was a declaration that mystery still lived, that the Rosy Cross still shone, that the brotherhood of the invisible had not abandoned humanity. And in this sense, whether or not these societies could trace a literal lineage back to the 17th century mattered less than the fact that they kept the flame alive. The Rosicrucian idea, half legend, half dream, half promise, was reborn. Yet this rebirth raised new questions. If so many groups now claim to be the true Rosicrucians, who among them, if any, held a genuine legacy? As the century closed, the myth was not only alive, it was multiplying. The stage was set for the 20th century, when Rosicrucianism would leap fully into modern culture, attracting seekers across the world and reshaping itself once more to meet the needs of a new age. The Rosicrucian manifesto spoke of two intertwined missions: the renewal of spiritual life and the healing of humanity. They claimed that the Brotherhood of the Rosicrucians worked for the universal reformation of the whole wide world, a phrase both audacious and mysterious. To their contemporaries, this sounded like utopian rhetoric. Yet centuries later, when we examine the history of science and medicine, a haunting question arises. Did the Rosicrucian dream help prepare the ground for the modern scientific revolution? At the heart of the Rosicrucian myth lay a radical vision. Unlike the scholastic tradition of medieval universities, which often separated theology from natural philosophy, the Rosicrucians insisted that the divine was woven into the very fabric of nature. To study nature, therefore, was not to strip away spirituality but to approach God through his creation. This was not science against religion, but science as devotion. In the early 17th century, when the manifestos appeared, this idea was revolutionary. The promise of hidden wisdom embedded in plants, metals, and the stars inspired a generation of thinkers to look at the world differently, to believe that mysteries were meant to be uncovered, not feared. Take, for example, the field of medicine. The Rosicrucians were deeply influenced by Paracelsus, the Swiss physician and alchemist who railed against the dogmas of traditional medicine. Paracelsus rejected the rigid reliance on ancient authorities like Galen and Hippocrates, insisting instead on direct observation, experimentation, and the belief that God had placed specific remedies within nature for every illness. His maxim, "The dose makes the poison," foreshadowed the modern concept of pharmacology. For Rosicrucians, Paracelsus was not only a doctor but a prophet. His blend of chemistry, mysticism, and healing became a blueprint for their vision of medical reform. Many early scientists, whether or not they call themselves Rosicrucians, operated within the same intellectual current. Robert Boyle, often called the father of modern chemistry, was fascinated by alchemy and spiritual philosophy. His famous Boyle's Law is celebrated in physics classrooms today, but less well known is his belief in a hidden wisdom guiding nature. He funded secret experiments, dabbled in alchemical transmutation, and even supported missionary efforts to spread what he believed was divine knowledge across the globe. In Boyle's fusion of experiment with spiritual purpose, we glimpse the Rosicrucian ideal at work. Science not a sterile mechanism but as a sacred vocation. Isaac Newton offers an even more startling case. The man who formulated the laws of gravity, calculus, and optics also filled notebook upon notebook with alchemical formulas, symbolic diagrams, and speculations on divine secrets. Newton was obsessed with finding the Prisca Sapientia, the original wisdom said to have been given by God to humanity and preserved through esoteric traditions. Though he never identified openly as Rosicrucian, the parallels are striking. He believed in a hidden architecture of the cosmos, a unity binding matter and spirit, and a secret knowledge encoded in scripture and nature. His scientific genius cannot be separated from this esoteric passion. To Newton, discovering the mechanics of the heavens was not only about mathematics, it was a form of revelation. The Rosicrucian myth also influenced the development of societies dedicated to advancing science. The Royal Society of London, founded in 1660, is often considered the first great scientific institution of the modern age. Several of its early members were steeped in alchemical and Rosicrucian ideas. They spoke of their work as part of a divine reformation of knowledge. The Society's motto, Nullius in verba, take no one's word for it, echoed the Rosicrucian insistence on personal experiment and observation rather than blind obedience to authority. The line between the Rosicrucian dream of universal reform and the practical birth of experimental science is not so clear-cut. One might say that while the Royal Society wore the robes of reason, its soul carried traces of Rosicrucian fire. In medicine, too, the Rosicrucian current left its mark. The growing acceptance of chemical remedies in the 17th and 18th centuries owed much to the Paracelsian tradition. Physicians began to use mineral-based treatments, rejecting the old humoral theories that had dominated for centuries. Hospitals and medical colleges slowly embraced the idea that disease could be studied, tested, and remedied through new methods rather than through ritual or inherited dogma. The Rosicrucian ideal of healing the sick without reward echoed in the ethos of early modern physicians who saw their vocation not merely as a profession, but as a sacred duty. And yet, as science became more formalized, a strange tension grew. On one hand, the Rosicrucians had helped ignite the belief that nature was intelligible and that knowledge could serve human flourishing. On the other, the scientific establishment began to strip away the mystical elements that had fueled this vision. Alchemy was rebranded as chemistry, but the longing for hidden wisdom remained. Medicine abandoned the magical correspondences of herbs and stars, but it retained the Paracelsian conviction that cures could be found by probing nature's secrets. The Rosicrucian flame was both carried forward and extinguished, hidden in plain sight within the laboratories of modernity. The legacy can also be seen in later pioneers who blurred the boundaries between science and spirituality. Samuel Hahnemann, the founder of homeopathy, was influenced by both Paracelsus and Rosicrucian ideas of harmony within nature. Antoine Mesmer, whose theories of animal magnetism prefigured modern hypnosis, spoke in the language of hidden forces binding all life. Even in the 19th and 20th centuries, medical and scientific visionaries carried echoes of Rosicrucian thinking. The healing was not just physical repair, but a restoration of cosmic balance. This raises a provocative question. Without the Rosicrucian myth, would modern science and medicine look the same? Perhaps the discipline of chemistry would still have emerged, and physics would still have advanced. Yet the drive to see knowledge as transformative, as sacred, as capable of renewing the world, that drive bore the Rosicrucian signature. The promise that humanity could rise by uncovering nature's mysteries gave courage to generations of experimenters. Even when they no longer wore the name of Rosicrucians, they carried the essence of the dream. But the Rosicrucians also left behind a shadow. By linking knowledge with secrecy, by cloaking wisdom in allegory and symbol, they gave birth to a tension between openness and hiddenness that science still wrestles with today. Should knowledge be guarded, revealed only to initiates, or should it be spread freely to all? The modern scientific ethos chose the latter, yet even now, research is often confined behind walls of institutions, patents, and restricted journals. The Rosicrucian paradox, knowledge as both universal gift and guarded treasure, remains unresolved. In the end, the Rosicrucian influence on science and medicine cannot be measured in formulas or experiments. It is felt instead in the atmosphere of daring, in the belief that nature hides secrets worth seeking, and in the conviction that such discoveries could transform not only individuals but entire societies. The Rosicrucians may never have been an organized body of scientists, yet their myth inspired the very spirit of modern inquiry. Their legacy is not just in dusty pamphlets, but in every laboratory, every hospital, every field where humanity strives to understand the hidden workings of life. The Rosicrucians promised that wisdom and healing were inseparable, that to know was to heal, and to heal was to know. This vision, carried forward through centuries, shaped the birth of modern science more than we dare admit. And as the story moves into the 20th century, the question grows sharper. How did Rosicrucianism survive into an age of airplanes, radio waves, and nuclear power? The answer lies in its extraordinary adaptability, a myth that could shift its shape yet never lose its essence. From the very beginning, the Rosicrucians thrived on paradox. They were everywhere and nowhere, silent yet thunderous, a brotherhood no one could find yet everyone seemed to speak about. That mystery gave them power, but it also created shadows. Wherever secrecy is prized, impostors inevitably appear. Wherever symbols stir or frauds will exploit them. And so the Rosicrucian myth, as it traveled across centuries, became a magnet for charlatans, visionaries, tricksters, and genuine seekers alike. The line between truth and deception blurred until it was nearly impossible to tell one from the other. The 17th century already knew this confusion. After the publication of the manifestos, dozens of individuals across Europe began claiming Rosicrucian identity. Some were idealists who saw themselves as heirs of the invisible brotherhood. Others were opportunists who understood that the Rosicrucian name carried instant fascination. Pamphlets circulated describing supposed meetings with Rosicrucian adepts, revelations of hidden doctrines, and miraculous cures performed by the brethren. Most of these accounts were fabrications or literary exercises, yet for the public they blurred into a single shimmering fog. If the Rosicrucians could not be found, perhaps that was proof of their reality. They were hidden too well to be caught. By the 18th century, the fog thickened. Europe was alive with secret societies, Freemasons, Illuminati, alchemists, mystics, and political radicals, all borrowing symbols from one another. The Rosy Cross became a favorite emblem. Lodges that had little or no connection to the original vision nonetheless draped themselves in Rosicrucian robes, claiming ancient authority to attract recruits. For many, The term Rosicrucian was less a concrete order than a brand, a seal of mystery that could make any society appear more alluring. The result was a bewildering proliferation of groups, some sincere in their spiritual work, others little more than theatrical clubs promising access to secret wisdom in exchange for Jews. The 19th century only magnified the problem. With the occult revival sweeping through Europe and America, countless individuals styled themselves as Rosicrucian masters. Some published esoteric treatises filled with recycled alchemical lore. Others promised magical powers, cures for every disease, or contact with invisible adepts. In Paris and London, advertisements appeared in newspapers for courses in Rosicrucian magic, often taught by men of questionable training. These self-proclaimed adepts knew the hunger of their audiences. In an age of science and disenchantment, people longed for mystery. To wear the Rosicrucian mask was to command attention. One of the most notorious examples was Paschal Beverly Randolph, an African-American occultist in the mid-19th century who founded his own Rosicrucian order. Randolph was a fascinating figure, blending genuine mystical insight with a flair for self-promotion. He taught a form of spiritual sexuality, claiming that love and desire were key to magical transformation. His teachings influenced later groups such as the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor and Thelema. Whether Randolph's order was truly Rosicrucian in any historical sense is debatable, but he illustrates how the myth could be remade to fit entirely new contexts. In America, the Rosicrucian name became attached to mail-order mysticism. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, advertisements promised initiations by correspondence, certificates of mastery, and access to secrets once guarded by the hidden brotherhood. Some of these groups evolved into serious esoteric societies. Others were thinly veiled scams. Yet even in their commercialism, they reveal the enduring magnetism of the Rosicrucian brand. The promise of hidden wisdom still compelled people to part with money, time, and loyalty. The paradox deepens when we consider that secrecy itself breeds suspicion. Genuine seekers often cloak their identities to avoid persecution or ridicule. At the same time, impostors exploited the same secrecy to hide deception. How could one tell the difference? For outsiders, there was little distinction. To skeptics, the entire Rosicrucian enterprise looked fraudulent, a patchwork of impostors, myths, and wishful thinking. To believers, impostors only proved that the true brotherhood remained hidden, untouched by the counterfeiters. The shadow of secrecy ensured that the Rosicrucians could never be fully debunked, because their invisibility was both their weakness and their strength. This pattern continues into the modern era. In the 20th century, organizations like Amok, the ancient mystical order Rosicrucians, rose to prominence, claiming authentic lineage back to the original brotherhood. Critics accuse them of inventing continuity, building elaborate rituals and history from fragments of legend. Supporters argued that lineage was less important than spirit, that the Rosicrucian dream could be renewed in each generation, regardless of literal continuity. The debate between fraud and authenticity became less about evidence and more about belief. What does it mean to be Rosicrucian? Is it membership in a literal order, or participation in a timeless myth? The tension between myth and imposture raises a larger question about the human need for secrecy and belonging. Why are we so drawn to hidden brotherhoods, to secret initiations, to invisible masters? Perhaps because they mirror our deepest sense of longing, that life is a hidden layer, that reality conceals a pattern waiting to be unveiled. Impostors may exploit this longing, but they do not create it. It exists in us already. The Rosicrucian myth simply gave it a shape, a name, a symbol in the rosy cross. In this sense, the shadow of secrecy is inseparable from the light. Fraud and imposture did not destroy the Rosicrucian tradition. They kept it alive, however distorted. Each false claim, each theatrical order, each self-proclaimed adept contributed to the myth's endurance. By multiplying versions of the Brotherhood, impostors made it impossible to pin the Rosicrucians down, ensuring their survival not as an organization but as an idea. But this survival comes at a cost. To this day, scholars struggle to untangle fact from fiction in Rosicrucian history. Was there ever a real brotherhood, or only pamphlets, legends, and imitators? Did the secrecy protect an authentic core, or was a core always empty, filled in by those who longed for it to exist? The impostors of the past force us to confront these unsettling questions. Perhaps the Rosicrucians were never meant to be found in lodges or rosters. Perhaps their true existence is in the imagination itself. As the 20th century dawned, the shadowy legacy carried forward. New groups arose, new frauds appeared, and new seekers were initiated into mysteries both genuine and fabricated. The line between them remained blurred, as it always had. For the Rosicrucians, secrecy was both their blessing and their curse, granting them immortality, but also condemning them to endless doubt. And yet, behind the impostors and frauds, the dream of the rosy crust still flickered. The idea that wisdom could transform the world, that hidden knowledge could heal humanity, that an invisible brotherhood might guide us from behind the veil. That dream endured. It had survived impostors before, and it would survive them again. When the Rosicrucian myth crossed the Atlantic, it entered a land uniquely suited to its transformation. America, with its vast open spaces, religious pluralism, and restless appetite for innovation, became fertile soil for secret societies. Hey, the Rosy Cross was not only a symbol of hidden wisdom, but also a banner for utopian dreams, visionary experiments, and, eventually, mass movements. The story of American Rosicrucians is as much about the nation itself, its optimism, its gullibility, its hunger for transcendence, as it is about the mystical brotherhood. The earliest traces of Rosicrucian influence in America appear in the 17th century, not long after the first manifestos had electrified Europe. Among the earliest colonists were radical religious groups seeking freedom from persecution, many of whom carried esoteric leanings. The mysterious German pietists who settled in Pennsylvania, for instance, formed communities that blended Christian devotion with alchemical speculation and mystical study. The most famous of these was the Ephrata cloister, founded in the 1730s by Johann Conrad Beissel. Ephrata was a semi-monastic settlement where celibacy, communal living, and esoteric Bible study were practiced. Its members dressed in white robes, sang haunting choral hymns, and followed strict ascetic routines. Though not formally Rosicrucian, the community carried the unmistakable scent of Rosicrucian ideals: secrecy, purification, and a pursuit of divine wisdom hidden beneath scripture. Other German mystical sects, such as the Moravians, also carried symbolic and philosophical echoes of the Rosy Cross. In these communities, America became a stage where Europe's half-buried esoteric traditions could bloom in freedom. Yet these were fragile experiments. Many dwindled after a generation or two, their strict practices proving unsustainable in the pragmatic environment of colonial America. Still, the seed was planted, the idea that America itself might harbor hidden orders, secret fraternities, and utopian brotherhoods devoted to spiritual transformation. The 19th century brought a new wave of Rosicrucian presence, this time through the explosion of occultism. America was already buzzing with spiritualism, seances, ghostly raps, and mediums claiming to channel the dead. Into this heady mix came Rosicrucian orders, some sincere, some opportunistic. They promised not only communication with the invisible world, but also access to timeless wisdom. For a nation intoxicated with both progress and mystery, the allure was irresistible. One of the most influential figures in this period was Paschal Beverly Randolph, an African-American occultist who founded his own Rosicrucian order in the mid-1800s. Randolph's life reads like a novel, a man of mixed race who rose from obscurity, traveled the world, studied with mystics, and returned to America to spread a radical vision. His Rosicrucian teachings were centered on the transformative power of love and sexuality, a doctrine far ahead of its time. Randolph argued that sexual energy, when used with reverence and love, was a key to unlocking divine power. In a Victorian age of repression, his ideas were shocking, yet they would echo through later occult traditions, influencing movements as diverse as a Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor and Aleister Crowley's Thelema. Randolph's Rosicrucianism illustrates the American gift for reinvention. In Europe, the Rosy Cross was often tied to scholarly mysticism or Christian esotericism. In America, it could become a vehicle for personal liberation, social reform, or even radical spirituality. The Brotherhood was not a fixed institution, but a living myth, adaptable to the New World's energies. By the late 19th century, Rosicrucian groups had multiplied across America. Some were small, secretive lodges, others advertised in newspapers, offering initiations by mail. This commercialization of mysticism scandalized traditionalists, but it also democratized the esoteric. No longer did one need to seek out a hidden master in the forests of Germany. One could send a letter, receive a certificate, and join the ancient brotherhood from the comfort of one's home. For many, the authenticity of these groups was questionable, but the longing they fulfilled was real. The culmination of this American Rosicrucian story came in the early 20th century with the rise of Amorc, the ancient mystical order Rosicrucians. Founded in 1915 by Harvey Spencer Lewis, Amorc presented itself as a true inheritor of the Rosicrucian tradition. Lewis, a charismatic promoter and mystic, claimed that he had been initiated into the order in Toulouse, France, by a surviving branch of the Brotherhood. Whether this initiation truly occurred or was a convenient myth is still debated, but Lewis's genius lay in packaging Rosicrucianism for the modern age. Amorc grew rapidly, headquartered in San Jose, California, where its imposing Rosicrucian parks still stand today. Complete with Egyptian-style temples, museums, and libraries, the park became a public face for a tradition that had always thrived in secrecy. Unlike earlier groups, Amorc did not hide from view. It embraced publicity. Its lessons were mailed to members around the world, promising access to mystical knowledge through graded teachings. Members could rise through degrees, much like in Freemasonry, but the focus was explicitly Rosicrucian: alchemy, mysticism, cosmic harmony, and spiritual science. Critics accuse Amorc of inventing a history, of constructing a mythos rather than preserving an authentic lineage. But that criticism misunderstands the power of myth. Whether or not Lewis's order had direct ties to the 17th century Brotherhood, it succeeded in making the Rosicrucian ideal accessible to tens of thousands of people. For its members, authenticity was less important than experience. Through AMRC, the Rosicrucian dream was not only remembered but lived. The rise of Amorc also reveals something quintessentially American about the Rosicrucian story. In Europe, secrecy had been essential, protection against persecution, a barrier against the uninitiated. In America, secrecy was transformed into spectacle. AMRC's temples were tourist attractions, its magazine widely circulated, its teachings mailed to anyone with a subscription. The invisible brotherhood became, paradoxically, highly visible. This openness ensured its survival, but also blurred the line between mysticism and marketing. Today, Amorc remains the most prominent Rosicrucian order, with lodges around the world and a carefully cultivated image of continuity. But it is only one strand in a larger American tapestry. Other Rosicrucian groups continue to exist, each claiming its own authority, each weaving its own myth. Some are small, dedicated circles of seekers. Others are international organizations with polished websites and membership fees. The Rosy Cross still shines as a symbol of hidden wisdom, adapted once again to the needs of a new century. The American Rosicrucians remind us that myths are not fossils, they are living organisms. They migrate, evolve, and reinvent themselves in new environments. In the soil of America, practical yet visionary, skeptical yet credulous, the Rosicrucian myth found a place to grow into something unprecedented. From utopian cloisters to sexual mysticism, from mail-order initiation to grand temples in California, the Rosy Cross has taken on many American faces. Each one reveals as much about America's spiritual hunger as it does about the Brotherhood itself. In the end, the American Rosicrucians did not merely inherit the European tradition, they transformed it. They made secrecy public, mysticism accessible, and the Rosy Cross a global symbol. Whether one sees this as fraud or genius depends on perspective. But one truth remains. Without America, the Rosicrucian dream might have remained a fading echo of 17th century Europe. Instead, it became a living tradition, continually reborn in new forms, carrying the eternal promise that somewhere, behind the veil, a brotherhood of wisdom still watches and waits. By the late 19th century, the Rosicrucian name had already become a vessel for countless experiments in mysticism, alchemy, and secret brotherhoods. But its echoes did not stop with Amorc or other American groups. Instead, the Rosy Cross seeped into the bloodstream of nearly every modern esoteric movement. Wherever occult revival flourished, the faint shimmer of Rosicrucian influence could be detected, sometimes as a central pillar, other times as a subtle fragrance. From the Hermetic Order, the Golden Dawn in London, to Helena Blavatsky's Theosophical Society, the Rosicrucian myth proved infinitely adaptable, shaping new visions of spirituality for an age of skepticism and science. The Hermetic Order, the Golden Dawn, founded in 1887, became perhaps the most influential magical order of the modern era. Built upon elaborate rituals, complex initiations, and a deep engagement with Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and alchemical symbolism, the Golden Dawn attracted some of the brightest minds of the time. W. B. Yeats, the Irish poet, walked its corridors. Aleister Crowley, the infamous magician, thundered against it even as he absorbed its teachings. Though the Golden Dawn drew on many sources, Rosicrucianism was central to its self-image. Its highest grades were explicitly Rosicrucian, culminating in the symbolic crossing into the second order, where the Rosy Cross represented not only mystical attainment but the soul's transfiguration. The Golden Dawn's rituals were theatrical and immersive. Candidates passed through chambers filled with symbols of death and rebirth, of darkness and illumination. The Rosy Cross stood at the heart of these dramas, not merely as a decorative emblem but as the axis of the initiate's transformation. To bear the Rosy Cross was to declare oneself a vessel of hidden wisdom, part of a lineage stretching back to the mysterious brethren of the 17th century. Whether or not this lineage was historically authentic mattered little. What mattered was the authority the symbol conveyed, the sense that initiation placed one in communion with something older, grander, and more profound than any ordinary society could offer. Yet even as the Golden Dawn flourished, it was riven with conflict. Personal rivalries, power struggles, and disputes over legitimacy fractured the order, leading to splinter groups and rival claimants. But in each of these factions, the Rosy Cross remained a constant. Its presence signaled continuity even amid chaos. In this way, the Rosicrucian current survived the Golden Dawn's decline, carried into new movements by initiates who would go on to found their own schools of esoteric thought. Parallel to the Golden Dawn's rise, another force was reshaping the Western spiritual landscape: Theosophy. Founded by the enigmatic Helena Petrovna Blavatsky in 1875, the Theosophical Society sought to unite Eastern and Western wisdom into a grand synthesis. Its emphasis was less on ceremonial ritual and more on universal truths, the hidden laws governing the cosmos and the evolution of the human soul. Though not overtly Rosicrucian, Theosophy absorbed much from the Rosicrucian mythos: the idea of secret brotherhoods guiding humanity, the conviction that ancient wisdom was encoded in symbols, and a belief in a hidden chain of adepts working behind the scenes of history. Blavatsky's writings often spoke of masters or mahatmas, hidden teachers dwelling in the Himalayas who directed the evolution of human consciousness. This imagery echoes the Rosicrucian manifestos' depiction of a secret brotherhood laboring for the reformation of the world. Just as the Rosicrucians were said to live unseen yet influence the course of knowledge, so too did Theosophy's hidden masters guide humanity's spiritual progress. The myth was reborn, clothed in Eastern terminology but carrying the same pulse of invisible guidance. Theosophy spread like wildfire, particularly in the English-speaking world. It captured the imaginations of artists, writers, and reformers, offering a spiritual vision that seemed both ancient and modern. Its blend of science, religion, and mysticism resonated with those who felt trapped between materialist rationalism and rigid orthodoxy. And at its core, the Rosicrucian ideal lingered, that truth is hidden, veiled, awaiting those who dare to seek it beyond the surface. The Rosicrucian spirit also found its way into other currents of modern occultism. Rudolf Steiner, once a leading figure in the Theosophical Society, broke away to found anthroposophy. Steiner explicitly linked his vision of spiritual science to Rosicrucian ideals. He even described his movement as a modern continuation of Rosicrucianism, recasting the Brotherhood as guide to humanity's inner development in the age of science and technology. In Steiner's vision, the Rosicrucian path was not about secrecy but about cultivating higher perception and ability to see the spiritual realities behind everyday life. His schools, biodynamic agriculture, and architectural experiments all bore the subtle mark of the Rosy Cross. Even movements that appeared to be entirely new bore Rosicrucian fingerprints. New Thought, with its emphasis on the power of the mind to shape reality, echoed the Rosicrucian conviction that hidden laws govern existence. Occult Freemasonry, which proliferated in the 19th and 20th centuries, often placed Rosicrucian degrees at its highest levels. The Rosy Cross became a universal token of mastery, an emblem of the initiate who had passed beyond outer forms to grasp inner truths. In the 20th century, the Rosicrucian echo chamber grew louder still. The burgeoning New Age movement, with a kaleidoscope of astrology, meditation, healing, and esoteric philosophy, owed much to Rosicrucian legacies. The very language of hidden masters, initiation, and ancient wisdom can be traced back through theosophy and the Golden Dawn to the Rosicrucian mythos of the 17th century. Even in popular culture, the Rosicrucians became shorthand for the mysterious and the arcane, appearing in novels, films, and conspiracy theories. What is striking is not just the persistence of Rosicrucian imagery, but its adaptability. The same symbol could serve ritual magicians in London lodges, mystical philosophers in Vienna, visionary educators in Germany, and spiritual seekers in California. The Rosy Cross was no longer just a Christian alchemical emblem. It had become a universal cipher for transformation. Its petals could open in 100 directions, each revealing a different color of truth. Yet beneath this adaptability lay a paradox. The more widely the Rosicrucian symbol spread, the harder it became to pin down its true meaning. Was it about hidden masters? About ritual initiation? About scientific progress? About personal transformation? Each movement claimed the Rosicrucian, but each reshaped it to fit its own vision. What united them was not doctrine but a mood, a sense of secrecy, of hidden depth, of a wisdom older than institutions yet more revolutionary than modernity itself. By the dawn of the 20th century, the Rosicrucians had ceased to be merely a historical puzzle of the early 1600s. They had become the invisible thread weaving together the tapestry of modern esotericism. Wherever one found seekers chasing mysteries, whether in smoky lodges, philosophical treatises, or California communes, the Rosy Cross seemed to glimmer, faint but unmistakable. And yet, just as it seemed the Rosicrucian spirit had been fully absorbed into the modern occult revival, another transformation was brewing. In the 20th century, the Rosy Cross would leave the cloisters of esoteric societies and enter the mainstream of culture itself. No longer confined to initiates and mystics, it would begin to haunt the broader imagination, fueling conspiracy theories, pop culture, and the idea that behind the visible world lurks a hidden order. By the 20th century, the Rosicrucians had slipped beyond the lodges and temples of dedicated initiates and into the bloodstream of popular imagination. No longer were they confined to dusty treatises, esoteric rituals, or secret circles. Instead, the Rosy Cross began to shimmer across novels, newspapers, pulp magazines, radio shows, and later film and television. In this transformation, the Brotherhood became something both larger and smaller than before, larger in its cultural reach, but smaller in its precision, as fact blurred into fiction and history dissolved into rumor. The Rosicrucians, once a hidden current of spiritual experiment, became one of the great archetypes of conspiracy culture. Writers of fiction were among the first to seize the Rosicrucian mystique. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, novels used the Rosy Cross as shorthand for mystery and forbidden knowledge. Some cast them as benevolent guides, guardians of hidden wisdom who shaped the course of civilization from behind the curtain. Others painted them as sinister manipulators, pulling the strings of kings and revolutions for their own occult ends. The ambiguity was part of the allure. Were the Rosicrucians humanity's secret protectors, or its unseen masters? Each author answered differently, but all drew upon the same tantalizing ambiguity of the original manifestos. The pulp magazines of the early 1900s, with their lurid tales of adventure, further spread Rosicrucian imagery. The Brotherhood was often depicted as exotic, mysterious, and slightly dangerous, a society of robe adepts guarding ancient secrets in underground temples. These stories reached millions of readers, many of whom may never have heard of the original 17th century texts. For them, the Rosicrucians became not a historical curiosity but a living archetype, the secret order that knows what others do not, holding keys to power and immortality. By the mid-20th century, as conspiracy thinking took root in mass culture, the Rosicrucians found themselves swept into a growing web of suspicion. Alongside the Freemasons, the Illuminati, and the Jesuits, they were accused of orchestrating revolutions, manipulating governments, and steering the course of science and religion. To conspiracy theorists, the very obscurity of the Rosicrucians was proof of their power. If no one could point to their leaders or lodges, then surely they must be even more deeply hidden, even more effective in their secrecy. The Cold War years gave paranoia fertile soil, and secret societies became a favorite target. Were Rosicrucians behind the United Nations? Did they guide the Manhattan Project? Were they the hidden architects of global finance? Books and pamphlets multiplied, each layering new accusations onto the Brotherhood's mythic shoulders. The Rosicrucian became a cipher, a symbol that could mean almost anything, a universal placeholder for hidden control. At the same time, popular entertainment continued to keep the Rosicrucians alive in gentler ways. They appeared in mystery novels, historical thrillers, and later in films and television shows that traded on the allure of secret orders. Sometimes they were mentioned by name. Other times, they were disguised under fictional labels but still bore the unmistakable features of the Rosicrucian myth, an ancient fraternity, an esoteric symbol, a promise of hidden wisdom just beyond reach. The explosion of conspiracy literature in the late 20th century, books like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and later the Da Vinci Code, further wove the Rosicrucians into a tapestry of hidden lineages, secret bloodlines, and occult conspiracies. Even when they were not the main actors, their shadow was present. The Rosicrucian hovered in the background of countless narratives about hidden wisdom and secret societies, part of a shared symbolic vocabulary that audiences instantly recognized. But this popularization carried a cost. The Rosicrucians were no longer understood as they once had been, as a radical call for spiritual and scientific renewal in the 1600s. Instead, they became almost interchangeable with other groups in the conspiracy imagination. For many, the distinctions between Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and Illuminati blurred into one amorphous hidden elite. The myth that had once inspired invisible colleges and scientific revolutions became fodder for paperback thrillers and late-night radio shows. And yet, even in this diluted form, the Rosicrucian myth retained its power. To whisper the word Rosicrucian was to evoke mystery, secrecy, and the possibility that the world was not as it seemed. For some, this was thrilling. For others, it was terrifying. In either case, it kept the Brotherhood alive in the collective imagination. What is striking is how elastic the myth proved to be. In the hands of occult orders, the Rosicrucian symbolized inner transformation. In pulp novels, it meant adventure and danger. In conspiracy tracts, it meant control and manipulation. In thrillers and films, it meant ancient wisdom and cryptic puzzles. Each adaptation was a distortion, yet each kept the myth from dying. The Rosicrucians survived not because their history was clear, but because it was not. Their ambiguity was their immortality. The rise of the Internet in the late 20th and early 21st centuries only amplified this. Online forums and conspiracy websites resurrected the Rosicrucians as part of sprawling theories of hidden elites. Photos of Rosicrucian symbols circulated with captions about secret control. YouTube videos linked them to everything from alien contact to suppressed technologies. In memes and comment threads, the Rosicrucian became one more symbol of the hidden hand. And so, centuries after their first appearance, the Rosicrucians continued to haunt culture. They became less a historical brotherhood and more a cultural archetype, an idea that could be reshaped to fit any fear or fantasy. To some, this was a tragedy, a loss of the Brotherhood's original vision. But to others, it was proof of the Rosicrucian's strange vitality. Few movements survived 4 centuries with their mystery intact. The Rosicrucians not only survived, they became immortal in imagination. From secret manifestos to scientific societies, from utopian communities to pulp novels, from occult lodges to internet conspiracies, the Rosicrucian has continually reinvented itself. In popular culture and conspiracy alike, it represents the same haunting question. What if there really is a secret order, just beyond our reach, shaping the course of history? And with that question lingering, the Rosicrucians step once more into the shadows of our story. But as history shows, they never stay hidden for long. In the next chapter, we will return not to fictional conspiracy, but to evidence, tracing what historians, scholars, and skeptics have actually uncovered about the brotherhood that refuses to die. For centuries, the Rosicrucians have been portrayed as puppet masters of history, guardians of forbidden knowledge, or shadowy architects of revolutions. But what happens when we strip away the fog of legend and approach the brotherhood with the tools of historical scholarship? The answer is both sobering and fascinating. While conspiracy writers thrive on ambiguity, professional historians, archivists, and scholars of esotericism have sought to untangle fact from fantasy. Their findings do not dismiss the Rosicrucians outright, but instead reveal a story that is less about secret overlords and more about how ideas can move through culture, changing the world in ways subtler but no less significant. The first point historians stress is that there is no evidence of a Rosicrucian order existing in the early 1600s as a physical organization with members, lodges, or rituals. The famous manifestos, the Forma Fraternitatis, 1614, the Confessio Fraternitatis, 1615, and the Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosicrucians, 1617, make bold claims about a fraternity of enlightened men working behind the scenes of Europe. But the documents themselves show no signs of being announcements from a real, operating brotherhood. Instead, they bear the marks of literary works, complex allegories, theological critiques, and philosophical provocations designed to spark discussion rather than recruit members. Historians generally attribute the writing of these manifestos to a small group of Lutheran intellectuals in the German city of Tübingen, sometimes called the Tübingen Circle. These men, figures like Johann Valentin Andri, Tobias Hess, and Christoph Besold, were deeply engaged with the religious and political crises of their time. Europe was on the brink of the 30 Years' War, a devastating conflict that would tear the continent apart. In this turbulent climate, the Rosicrucian manifestos can be read as a visionary appeal, a call for a new spiritual and scientific reformation, one that would transcend sectarian divisions and lead humanity toward wisdom and renewal. From this perspective, the brotherhood described in the manifestos may have been less a real organization than an ideal. Christian Rosicrucian, the mythical founder, functioned as a symbolic figure rather than a historical person. His life story, traveling to the East, gathering wisdom, founding a secret fraternity, echoed tropes common in Renaissance allegory. It was not biography but myth, crafted to embody a vision of spiritual rebirth. This view helps explain why no contemporary evidence has ever been found of Rosicrucian lodges operating in the 1600s. The countless pamphlets and tracts that appeared in response to the manifestos all debated the idea of the brotherhood, not interactions with actual members. Some writers begged to be admitted, others denounced the Rosicrucians as heretics or deceivers, but all were responding to the text, not to a tangible order. Of course, this does not mean the Rosicrucian myth was powerless. On the contrary, historians point out that the manifestos have profound influence even without an underlying organization. They contributed to the emergence of the so-called invisible college, networks of scholars, natural philosophers, and reformers who shared information and ideas outside of traditional institutions. This spirit of collaborative inquiry helped lay the groundwork for what would become the scientific revolution. In this sense, the Rosicrucians may not have founded secret lodges, but they did help inspire new ways of thinking about knowledge, science, and spirituality. Another key insight from historians is the way later generations retroactively built real organizations around the Rosicrucian name. By the 18th century, as Freemasonry spread across Europe, numerous Masonic rites incorporated Rosicrucian degrees. These lodges did exist physically, with rituals, initiations, and symbols, but they were not continuations of a 17th century brotherhood. Rather, they were creative reinventions, drawing on the myth and giving it institutional form. This process of backfilling history created the illusion of continuity. To the outside observer, it appeared that the Rosicrucians had been quietly at work for centuries, when in reality the story was being written in layers over time. Modern Rosicrucian groups, such as the ancient mystical order Rosicrucis, Amok, emerged in the 19th and 20th centuries, particularly in America. These groups adopted Rosicrucian symbols, myths, and language, but they built entire systems of teaching around them, offering lessons in mysticism, metaphysics, and spiritual development. While their members may sincerely believe they are part of an ancient lineage, historians view these movements as part of the modern occult revival, a creative continuation of the myth rather than direct survival from the 1600s. This clash between historical analysis and mythic belief has fueled debate for over a century. Believers argue that the very lack of evidence proves the Rosicrucian skill at secrecy. Historians counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and none has been found. What is certain is that the myth has been powerful enough to create real communities, inspire artistic works, and shape cultural imagination, regardless of whether the original brotherhood ever existed in tangible form. Some scholars even suggest that the Rosicrucian story should not be judged by the standards of historical fact at all. Instead, it belongs to the realm of cultural mythology, a set of symbols and narratives that capture timeless human longings. The quest for hidden wisdom, the hope of spiritual transformation, the dream of a brotherhood uniting knowledge and compassion. These are universal themes. Whether or not an actual lodge of Rosicrucians ever met in a candlelit chamber, the story of the Rosy Cross continues to resonate because it speaks to something deeper in the human spirit. Yet there is also a cautionary note. When myth and history blur, the result can be fertile for creativity but also for manipulation. The Rosicrucians, once symbols of renewal, became enmeshed in conspiracy theories that fuel fear and paranoia. This dual legacy, creative inspiration on one side, paranoid suspicion on the other, reflects the ambiguity at the heart of the Rosicrucian myth. In the end, historians remind us that separating fact from fantasy does not mean stripping away meaning. The Rosicrucians may not have been puppet masters, but their manifestos remain extraordinary documents, radical, provocative, and visionary. They challenge Europe to imagine a new path beyond dogma, a path where science and spirituality could walk hand in hand. That challenge, more than any secret lodge, is a true legacy of the Rosicrucians. And so, fact and fantasy remain intertwined. The Rosy Cross is not just a symbol of a hidden order. It is a mirror reflecting our own desires for knowledge, transformation, and mystery. The historian can trace the documents, the reactions, the cultural shifts. But the myth will always remain, shimmering just beyond reach, reminding us that some stories refuse to be reduced to footnotes. The story of the Rosicrucians did not end in the dusty pamphlets of the 1600s. Even though historians argue that the original brotherhood was more allegory than flesh and blood, the myth refused to die. Instead, it took root in the imaginations of seekers across centuries, resurfacing in new guises and new orders that claim to carry the Rosicrucian torch into modern times. Today, if you search for the Rosy Cross, you will not find a single hidden lodge or ancient archive. Instead, you will find living movements, organizations, and societies spread across the globe, each interpreting the Rosicrucian legacy in its own way. Some are small esoteric circles, others boast tens of thousands of members. All, however, share a conviction that the Rosy Cross is not a relic of the past but a living path for the present. One of the most prominent of these groups is the ancient mystical order Rosicrucians, better known as a Mork. Founded in the early 20th century by H. Spencer Lewis in New York, a Mork presents itself as a continuation of the Rosicrucian tradition. Its teachings are structured, organized, and accessible. Members receive graded lessons through correspondence, covering topics such as meditation, metaphysics, sacred geometry, and spiritual development. Unlike the mysterious pamphlets of 1614, a Mork offers a clear curriculum, designed for modern seekers who wish to apply esoteric wisdom in everyday life. It positions itself as both ancient and modern, drawing upon symbols and myths from the Rosicrucians, but packaging them in a form suited to an age of mass communication. A Mork is not alone. In Europe, particularly in France, there are other groups that claim Rosicrucian lineage, some of which predate MRC's foundation. The Rosicrucian Fellowship, founded by Max Heindel in 1909, emphasizes a blend of Christian mysticism and astrology, presenting itself as a spiritual school rather than a secret society. Meanwhile, the Lectorium Rosicrucianum, a Dutch esoteric movement established in the 20th century, focuses on inner transformation through Gnostic-inspired teachings, framing the Rosy Cross as a symbol of the soul's rebirth. Each of these movements insists that it holds a true interpretation of the Rosicrucian vision, and yet their diversity suggests that the Rosy Cross is a symbol flexible enough to hold many meanings. What is striking about these groups is how they bridge myth and modernity. On the one hand, they speak the language of tradition, claiming links, sometimes literal, sometimes symbolic, to the legendary brotherhood of Christian Rosicrucians. On the other, they operate in a thoroughly contemporary world, complete with websites, international conferences, and even YouTube channels. They present themselves not as medieval relics, but as living schools of wisdom, offering seekers tools to navigate the challenges of modern life: stress, disconnection, loss of meaning. The appeal of such movements lies not only in their teachings, but in their atmosphere of belonging. To join a Rosicrucian order today is to step into a community that promises access to secrets hidden from the everyday world. The rituals, the symbols, the language of initiation, all of these create a sense of stepping beyond the ordinary, of touching a current that stretches back through centuries. Even if historians caution that no unbroken lineage exists, the emotional experience of joining such an order can be profound. Members often describe it as entering a family of seekers, united by a shared quest for wisdom. And yet, the Rosicrucians of today are not free from criticism. Skeptics argue that modern orders are more akin to esoteric clubs or even self-help organizations than to the visionary brotherhood imagined in the 1600s. Some accuse groups like Amorc of being commercial, selling mystical lessons rather than offering true enlightenment. Others see them as inheritors of the same ambiguity that has always surrounded the Rosy Cross, an alluring promise of hidden knowledge, always just out of reach. Despite such critiques, modern Rosicrucian orders continue to thrive. Amorc, for instance, claims tens of thousands of members worldwide, from Brazil to South Africa to the Philippines. In their temples and lodges, members gather for rituals that weave together ancient symbols with modern interpretations. They light candles, meditate on the Rosy Cross, and recite invocations that speak of harmony between science and spirit. The language may echo the manifestos of the 17th century, but the context is unmistakably contemporary. There is also a broader cultural influence to consider. Even outside formal orders, the idea of the Rosicrucian has seeped into popular spirituality, art, and literature. The image of the Rosy Cross, mystical, enigmatic, glowing with hidden meaning, appears in countless books, films, and even video games. It has become part of the modern mythological landscape, a shorthand for mystery and secret wisdom. This cultural diffusion means that the Rosicrucian ideal lives on not only in lodges and temples, but in the collective imagination of the modern world. But what exactly do these modern Rosicrucians believe? At their core, most orders teach that the Rosy Cross represents a union of spirit and matter, the blossoming of the soul within the crucible of human experience. They frame life as a path of transformation, where suffering can be transmuted into wisdom, ignorance into knowledge, and mortality into a deeper connection with the eternal. It is a vision not of domination or conspiracy, but of inner alchemy, the same dream that first stirred in the pamphlets of the 1600s. Of course, not all members are mystics or visionaries. For many, joining a Rosicrucian order is less about attaining hidden powers and more about finding a structure for personal growth. The rituals and teachings provide a rhythm, a framework for reflection in a world that often feels fragmented and rootless. In this sense, the Rosy Cross functions as a tool of meaning-making, an anchor in an age of uncertainty. And yet, even as they adapt to the modern age, these groups maintain the aura of secrecy that has always defined the Rosicrucian name. Initiations are private, lessons are revealed gradually, and symbols are explained layer by layer. This balance, between openness and mystery, between accessibility and secrecy, has proven to be the enduring formula for the Rosicrucian survival. Too much secrecy, and the movement risks fading into obscurity. Too little, and it loses the allure that draws seekers in the first place. Ultimately, the Rosicrucians today are less a single order than a constellation of movements, each orbiting around a shared myth. They may disagree on origins, doctrines, or methods, but all draw nourishment from the same root, the vision of a brotherhood devoted to wisdom, transformation, and the union of science and spirit. Whether one sees them as inheritors of an ancient legacy or as creative reinventors of a myth, their existence testifies to the enduring power of the Rosy Cross. For the seeker, the Rosicrucians today offer a mirror. To some, they reflect a path of genuine spiritual growth. To others, they reflect the human hunger for mystery and belonging. And for skeptics, they reflect the power of myth to create institutions, communities, and identities, even when the original may never have existed in the way the legends claim. And so, in the 21st century, the Rosicrucians are not simply a chapter in history. They are a living presence, a testament to the way myths can shape movements and how ancient symbols can be reborn in new ages. The Rosy Cross still shines, not as a relic, but as a beacon for those who believe that hidden wisdom continues to whisper just beyond the veil of the ordinary. The Rosy Cross was once whispered about in secret chambers and debated in dusty pamphlets. Yet today, its echoes are not confined to arcane lodges or scholarly debates. The symbol, and the ideas bound up with it, have spilled into the fabric of modern culture. They surface in art, architecture, literature, music, and even popular entertainment. Often these appearances go unnoticed, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone with the right eye to see them. The Rosicrucians may have promised to remain invisible, but their symbol has become strangely visible, woven into the very culture that once denied their existence. Perhaps the most striking evidence of this cultural infiltration lies in art. From the Romantic painters of the 19th century to surrealists of the 20th, artists have long been drawn to esoteric imagery. The Rosicrucian, with its fusion of suffering and beauty, became a perfect symbol for the human condition. Painters such as William Blake, who was steeped in mystical thought, created visionary works where crosses and roses intermingled in luminous detail. Though Blake never openly declared himself a Rosicrucian, his art radiates with the same spirit, a marriage of imagination, spirituality, and secret wisdom. Later, in the symbolist movement, artists like Jean Delville drew heavily on Rosicrucian themes, crafting paintings where roses, stars, and radiant crosses became emblems of hidden truths. Literature, too, has been saturated with Rosicrucian echoes. The Romantic poet Novalis, born Friedrich von Hardenberg, openly associated himself with the Rosicrucian tradition. His writings celebrated the mystical union of love, death, and transcendence, themes central to the Rosicrucian. Even in mainstream literature, subtle nods appear. The works of Goethe, for instance, are infused with alchemical and mystical symbolism that aligns closely with Rosicrucian thought. Later, in the 19th century, writers like Edward Bulletin drew directly on Rosicrucian imagery, most famously in his novel Zanoni, which depicted a mysterious adept from a secret brotherhood. The novel helps amend the image of the Rosicrucian as a timeless guardian of hidden wisdom, a motif that has since filtered into countless works of fiction. In architecture, too, traces can be found. Rosicrucian groups of the 20th century, particularly Amorque, left behind striking buildings infused with esoteric symbolism. Their headquarters in San Jose, California, the Rosicrucian Park, features Egyptian-style temples, a planetarium, and gardens designed to reflect ancient wisdom. Walking through it feels less like entering a modern campus and more like stepping into a living myth. The Rosicrucian itself, etched in stained glass, carved into stone, or planted into the very structure of buildings, serves as a reminder that symbols of power not only in books but in the spaces we inhabit. And then there's music. The Rosicrucian inspired not only classical composers but modern ones too. The French composer Eric Satie wrote a series of works called Le Fils des Étoiles, the Son of the Stars, directly tied to a Rosicrucian play, and was himself associated with Rosicrucian order in Paris during the 1890s. His music, ethereal and dreamlike, was intended to open listeners to higher states of consciousness. In this way, the Rosicrucian was not just painted or written but sung into existence, vibrating through the very air. Perhaps most surprising of all, however, is how the Rosicrucian myth has entered popular culture in subtle ways. Conspiracy theories about secret societies have become a staple of novels, films, and video games, and the Rosicrucians often appear alongside the Freemasons, the Illuminati, and the Templars. Dan Brown's A Da Vinci Code may never mention them explicitly, but its world of hidden brotherhoods and mystical symbols owes much to the cultural groundwork laid by centuries of Rosicrucian lore. In video games like Assassin's Creed, echoes of the Rosicrucian myth appear in quest for ancient knowledge and secret orders shaping history from shadows. This cultural presence raises an intriguing question. Do the creators who use Rosicrucian symbols always know their origins, or have these motifs become archetypes that resurface naturally? A rose blooming upon a cross, after all, is a powerful image even stripped of context. It speaks of suffering transformed into beauty, death yielding to rebirth. Whether or not audiences consciously recognize the Rosicrucian connection, the symbol works on the imagination, tapping into universal themes that need no explanation. And yet, for those who do know the history, these cultural appearances carry extra weight. To walk past a church window adorned with a rose cross, to read a novel that references Christian Rosenkreuz, or to stumble upon Rosicrucian emblems in a museum exhibit is to feel a kind of secret kinship with history itself. It is as if the invisible brotherhood still lingers, its presence coded into the very symbols of our world. Critics might argue that these appearances are coincidences, or simply the recycling of old symbols. After all, roses and crosses are not exclusively Rosicrucian. They are staples of Christian iconography too. But this ambiguity is precisely what gives the Rosicrucian its power. It hides in plain sight, never entirely owned by one tradition, always capable of being reinterpreted. That slipperiness ensures that the Rosicrucian spirit remains alive, not confined to one definition but constantly reborn in new guises. Consider 2. The way modern spiritual seekers outside formal Rosicrucian orders still use the imagery. Self-help books, New Age workshops, and meditation guides frequently feature crosses with blooming flowers, radiant stars, or mysterious rose imagery. Few of these claim a direct link to Rosicrucianism, but the aesthetic and symbolic parallels are undeniable. The rosy cross has become part of the larger mystical vocabulary of the modern world, a floating symbol that continues to inspire, whether consciously or unconsciously. In this sense, the Rosicrucians may have achieved what their manifestos promised, invisibility combined with influence. They may not rule from hidden chambers or control the levers of power, but their symbol has infiltrated culture so deeply that it has become part of the collective unconscious. When people see a rose entwined with a cross, they may not think of Christian Rosicrucians, but they feel something, an echo of mystery, of transformation, of hidden wisdom calling from just beyond reach. And that, perhaps, is the greatest achievement of the Rosicrucians in modern culture. They are not a secret society lurking in shadows, but a living myth threaded through everyday life. Their presence is not enforced through power or conspiracy, but invited through imagination and art. The rosy cross does not dominate culture. It haunts it, appearing in flashes and fragments, always suggestive, never fully explained. Thus, the Rosicrucian survival into the 21st century is not just about lodges and rituals, but about the endurance of a symbol. Symbols live longer than organizations. They travel farther than manifestos. They slip from one age to another, changing shape but retaining essence. The rosy cross is one such symbol, hidden yet visible, ancient yet modern. It may never reveal all its secrets, but perhaps that is why it continues to fascinate. For in every rose upon a cross, the invisible brotherhood whispers, "We are still here." As we reach the end of this long journey through mystery, myth, and memory, one question lingers. What do the Rosicrucians really mean for us today? Were they simply the invention of a group of disillusioned intellectuals in 17th century Germany? Were they flesh and blood adepts who hid themselves from history's gaze? Or were they something else entirely, an idea, a symbol, a dream too powerful to remain confined to a single age? Whatever the answer, the Rosicrucians have left a mark on history that cannot be ignored. Their story continues to echo not because of what they were, but because of what they represent. At the heart of the Rosicrucian myth is a vision of transformation. The rose blossoming on the cross is more than an emblem. It is a promise that out of suffering can come beauty, out of darkness can come illumination, and out of the rigid structures of dogma can come renewal. In an age torn apart by religious wars, this vision offered hope of reconciliation between faith and reason, between science and spirit. And in our own time, fractured by disinformation, alienation, and the speed of change, that promise resonates just as strongly. To understand the Rosicrucians today, we must see beyond conspiracy theories and legends. Strip away the cloak of secrecy, and what remains is a set of ideals. The pursuit of hidden knowledge, the belief in human perfectibility, the conviction that truth lies not in domination but in harmony. These are not the tools of puppet masters pulling strings behind the scenes. They are the aspirations of seekers who dare to imagine a better world. Whether or not a secret lodge ever met in candlelit chambers, the Rosicrucian challenge endures. Can humanity unite wisdom and compassion, science and spirituality into a higher form of life? And yet, the enduring power of the Rosicrucians lies not only in their ideals but in their ambiguity. The lack of definitive proof, the blurred line between history and myth, gives them a paradoxical strength. They are both present and absent, real and imagined, a brotherhood both invisible and everywhere. This tension is what keeps them alive in the cultural imagination. If the Rosicrucians had been just another sect with strict dogmas and rigid structures, they might have faded into obscurity centuries ago. But because they remain elusive, half dream, half reality, they continue to intrigue, to inspire, to unsettle. For the modern seeker, the Rosicrucians are less an organization than a mirror. Those who look into the rosy cross see what they are ready to see. To some, it is a spiritual path, a call to inner transformation. To others, it is a symbol of rebellion against oppressive systems, an invitation to think freely and challenge orthodoxy. And to skeptics, it is a cautionary tale about how myths can be mistaken for history. The truth may lie somewhere in between, but the significance of the Rosicrucians lies precisely in their openness to interpretation. Perhaps the most profound lesson the Rosicrucians leave us is this: Secret knowledge is never entirely about the secrets themselves. It is about the journey of seeking. The manifestos of the 1600s may not have opened the doors of a hidden lodge, but they did something far more radical. They sparked the imagination of Europe. They invited people to believe that greater truths might lie beyond what was visible, and in doing so, they ignited a movement that bridged science, religion, and philosophy. In this sense, the Rosicrucians accomplished their mission, whether or not they ever existed as a tangible order. Today, as we confront crises of our own, climate change, political division, the erosion of meaning, the Rosicrucian vision asks us to consider, how will we transform suffering into renewal? Can we, like the rose upon the cross, bloom in the midst of trial? Can we find ways to unite knowledge with compassion, progress with wisdom? These are not esoteric questions for hidden lodges alone. They are questions for every one of us, here and now. And so, the rosy cross still shines, not as a promise of hidden power, but as a symbol of possibility, its petals open toward the light, reminding us that even in times of upheaval, transformation is possible. Its cross anchors that bloom in suffering, reminding us that growth comes not in spite of hardship but through it. Together, they form an emblem not of conspiracy, but of the human journey itself. In the end, the Rosicrucians may be less about who they were and more about who we are. They are a myth we continue to write, a story we continue to tell ourselves about the pursuit of wisdom, the hope of transformation, and the dream of unity. Whether whispered in secret manifestos, painted on the walls of a temple, or glimpsed in the cultural shadows of our own age, the Rosy Cross remains what it has always been, an invitation. An invitation to see beyond the surface, to seek what is hidden, and to believe that knowledge and love together can change the world. And so we close the book, but the mystery remains. Somewhere between myth and history, between fantasy and fact, the Rosicrucians endure, not as masters of destiny, but as keepers of a question. What if hidden wisdom is not hidden at all, but waiting in plain sight for those who dare to seek it?